What's up, Chaos Shinobi here. This is what if Naruto is the neglected heir of Tobirama Senju. Summary: Naruto is neglected by his family for his younger twin siblings. His potential is seen by Tobirama Senju and becomes his sensei. See him rise against the odds. Chapter 14, Hokage Office. It had been 6 long years and the time for the batch of academy prospects to graduate was upon them. Hiruzen puffed on his pipe, looking at the various files lying in front of him. This was the hardest thing he admitted to doing every year. Selecting Jinan teams for graduates, a balanced team where each member would be beneficial to the other, how their teamwork would let them come on top of their own individual weaknesses. These teams would be together for years to come and would most likely shape their futures. In short, he sighed. He was getting too old for all this. His eyes darted towards the door that opened. He let out a puff watching several Jounins file in the room. He decided the teams ultimately, but the Jounins did request their subordinates personally or suggested him teams. It was how it had always worked for them. He saw his son straight away going for 3 files and tossing them in front of him. I request Hino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akimichi for my Jinan squad, he murmured, puffing on a cigarette himself. Many murmurs ran across the room saying he had picked out the golden squad already. The Ino Shikacho trio? The Hokage murmured deep in thought and Asuma gave a curt nod. Their fathers had surely been a menace and were the strongest squad the village had when they were active. Maybe he could recreate the success of the previous generation with them. He glanced at his son from underneath his hat and the small smirk plastered on his face. He wanted them badly and Hiruzen knew he would make fine shinobi out of them. He gave one final puff before nodding and picking up the files. He handed the 3 files to Asuma, who smiled widely. Very well, Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akimichi will be under the command of Asuma Sarutobe. Study their files carefully and pick them up tomorrow for their test. He barked in his Hokage voice. Asuma nodded, tucking the 3 files under his arm, and watched on the proceedings curiously. Hiruzen watched the newest of all the Jounins, Kurenai Yuhi, stepping forward to the table laden full of prospective candidates' files. She bristled through them one after the other and finally picked 3 out, handing them to the old man. Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame and Hinata Hyuga? He murmured, glancing and opening the 3 files up. He went into deep thought and glanced at the Kunoichi, who was looking at him with a smile. Any particular reasons for these 3? He asked those saw the potential tracker and retrieval team she was trying to create. Hinata with her Byakugan scouting out enemies, Kiba being the natural tracker with his Inuzuka clan's abilities, and Shino with his insects for capture through a distance or for distractions. I wish to make a tracker team from them, Lord Third, she said politely, getting a nod in return. He had already figured as much. But would the team fit? Kiba, the brash and proud Inuzuka, Shino, the quiet and logically seeing Aburame distanced from everyone else, and Hinata, the shy and compassionate Kunoichi who was almost too nice to even think of hurting someone's feelings. He hummed, thinking about granting her the squad of her choice or not. Kiba and Shino might fit, the Inuzuka playing leader with his pride and alpha male personality, and Shino letting him have his space, being the logical one he was. But where did Hinata fit in? She was too quiet and shy for her own good, though had the most potential out of almost all the fresh Kunoikis and the revered Byakugan with her. Kurenai saw his apprehension and decided to say something. What wrong, Lord Hokage? She asked nervously, making his serious eyes turn to her. He said nothing and let out a puff of smoke, still in deep thought. All of their thoughts were broken when the door to the chambers opened abruptly and in walked a silver-haired Jounin reading the infamous orange book. He saw eyes on him. I smiled with his lone visible eye. Well, you see, I thought I saw something shiny in the sky and decided to follow it, thinking it was an alien ship, but in the end it turned out to be a balloon, he said lazily, pulling out a silver balloon from behind him. Hiruzen chuckled wholeheartedly at Kakashi's antics. The man always did have a theme for theatrics when it came to excuses. The other Jounins watched him incredulously with pin-drop silence until Asuma spoke up. That really is shiny, he murmured, getting even more incredulous stares, and shrugged nonchalantly. Kakashi strolled down to the front and Hiruzen watched with narrowed eyes when his best elite Jounins started rummaging through files. All the Jounins were watching intently. Kakashi never wanted a team, so it was a surprise when he himself was actively taking a part and choosing a team for himself. Hiruzen smiled. Maybe he might pass a squad this year, as he watched the man's childlike enthusiasm when he searched for it. Hiruzen saw him go through files but knew it was all an act. The man knew what he wanted but was purposefully wasting his time, but he couldn't say the suspense wasn't exciting. His eyes lingered on Kakashi's hands as he handed him 2 files, and he instantly opened the thread over them and flipped them open. Almost every head in the room leaned in and broke into a fit of murmurs and whispers at seeing who he had picked out. Sasuke Uchiha and Naruto Namikaze. Hiruzen spoke aloud and went into another round of deep thoughts. the two top boys of the year and rivals. It was no news to Hiruzen that the two would do fine on a team. Sasuke only respected strength and Naruto was the only boy he knew who kept beating him in each of his challenges with ease. They held a mutual respect for each other and pushed each other further to keep up with the other. The idea seemed quite possible now. He looked up at the lazy Jounin and ignored all the curious stares of the people wondering if he would grant his request of putting the two strongest genins together. "What about the kunoichi of your squad?" he asked, and all eyes rested on Kakashi, who once again looked at the files on the table and frowned. "Ah," he said happily as his eyes rested on the 3 open files underneath his own and a small picture of indigo hair caught his eye. I smiled and reached for it and threw it with the other two, making Hiruzen raise an eyebrow. Kurenai's eyes widened in shock as Hiruzen spoke the name of his third requested charge. "Hinata Hyuga," he said, and glanced at Kurenai, who was outright glaring at the lone-eyed man. "I have already requested her for my squad." She bristled angrily, making Kakashi glance at her a bit before looking back at Hiruzen, who was scrutinizing him quite intently. "Oh?" he spoke in amusement, causing the glare to intensify, but ignored it. His eyes glanced at the 2 open files from where he had picked it up from. He looked back at Hiruzen, who was now just leaning back in his seat and watching the bickering start in pure curiosity. "Have you approved it then, Sundaime?" the lazy Jounin asked, making Hiruzen smirk ever so slightly before shaking his head in negative. Kakashi's eye turned to the furiously glaring red-eyed Jounin and he smiled. "Then I guess I could request her. She would be perfect for my squad, Kurenai," he said in his usual lazy voice, making her bristle in anger and glare at him as he tried to break her perfect squad. "No, she would be perfect under my squad and tutelage, Lord Hokage. I will help her sort out her confidence issues and her Byakugan would be invaluable to my team. She doesn't fit in Kakashi's ridiculously put-together squad at all." She protested heatedly at the thought of losing the girl she cared so much about. The Hokage hummed and turned his eyes to the lone-eyed Jounin, who was reading his book calmly. "How would Hinata work it out on your squad, Kakashi?" "Kurenai's selections do show merits," he said, giving him a chance. He himself agreed with Kurenai. The girl might become a third wheel and become sidetracked with the 2 heavily strong boys. And her meek and shy nature might put her aside even more and make her an outcast. He would have denied had any other Jounin asked for her with these 2, but since it was Kakashi, he would give the man a chance to point out his reasons. Kurenai smirked and looked at Kakashi, who in a rare occurrence closed his book with a snap and looked at the Hokage seriously. "She will be perfect, Hokage-sama. With Sasuke and Naruto being highly proficient in ninjutsu and taijutsu with mid to close range capabilities, she could become a perfect addition to my team," he said ever so calmly, making Hiruzen raise an eyebrow. "Oh, how so?" he asked curiously and leaned forward with his chin over his crossed fingers. "She is excellent in taijutsu but shows her deep interest to be a medical ninja. She has been creating bombs and healing ointments from a young age and even took some of the healing classes that were given at the academy as her extra skill," he said, and got a small nod from Hiruzen. A Hyugan that too as a medic would be quite the sight to behold. The combat medics usually weren't trained for combat too much, but a Hyuga could accomplish quite a lot given their enemies would think twice of charging them head-on, and her Byakugan coupled with healing abilities would make even Tsunade drool at having her as an apprentice, though it would be a cold day in hell when she took on another apprentice. He hummed and thought while Kurenai was suddenly nervous and cursing the silver-haired Jounin. "She wouldn't fit in Lord Third. Those 2 are leaps and bounds above her in their skills and would think she would just hold them back. She might become an outcast." She was cut off by the nonchalant voice of Kakashi. "She has deep feelings for Naruto and he returns them. He cares a lot for the girl. I don't think being an outcast would be a problem," he said, making her fall silent and curse him even more. Hiruzen took note of the point in favor of Kakashi and was now seriously considering his suggestion and approved the squad. What about Sasuke then? He would no doubt look down upon her shy and kind nature. His attitude is too dark for her, she argued, making Kakashi smile in that infuriating manner she hated so much. "Sasuke hates one thing more than a shy and kind girl. A fangirl. If you were to take Hinata, I would have to make do with Sakura, who is infatuated with the boy. You on the other hand, being a kunoichi, might help her break away out of those obsessive natures. Hinata will be fine with me, plus Naruto will make her confidence soar like always," he said, and she gritted her teeth at the losing battle she was fighting. The small smile on Hiruzen's face was proof enough he was considering this suggestion heavily. "Plus, Sakura has perfect chakra control, I might add, and you might have a potential genjutsu mistress in your hands, and she might even pick up a sensory technique to help your squad even more. With Hinata, my heavy assault team will be complete. It's a win-win for the both of us, Kurenai-chan." He chirped happily, and she glared at the way he had called her but said nothing. As much as she loathed to admit it, he did have some good points there. "I have made my decision," rang the calm voice of Hiruzen as he closed and handed the 3 files to the smiling Jounin. "Kakashi, you have your squad, Make them a fine team. They have the greatest potential out of all the squads this year. I place my faith in your hands, he said, and Kakashi nodded, absolutely delighted with a wonderful squad in his hands. Hiruzen handed Kurenai her 2 requested files and added Sakura Haruno's file to it. He would have placed Sasuke with him without a doubt, and Naruto's presence with Kakashi would help in assuring there was always a proficient Sharingan user with him if he ever lost control. Kurenai, your squad too is quite a balanced one if you work with them nicely. I expect quite a lot out of them, he said in his ever-calm tone, and she nodded with a small sad smile. Even if she hadn't gotten the girl she considered a little sister, she had 2 of her choices approved and the third Kunoichi had a potential for Genjutsu. Maybe it wasn't so bad. What about the Uzumaki twins? Asked Genma, making Hiruzen not already expecting the question for a while now. All eyes are sat on him now. Menma and Mito Uzumaki have been put onto a squad and assigned a special sensei after a long discussion between me, Jiraiya and Kushina. You all don't need to worry about it, he said in a tone of finality, and everyone decided to end the topic then and there. They knew the man wasn't in the mood to answer any other questions and they started going through the rest of the files. Meanwhile, at the Konoha Academy, Naruto, dressed in a plain black shirt and black pants, as were all the other students in their final year for their medical evaluations before they graduated tomorrow, was in a silent hallway in the academy. He had some time before the next evaluation and ran his hands softly along the slim waist of the girl he was holding. Hinata, like Naruto, dressed in a black shirt and a thigh-length black skirt while she had her back against the wall and her arms around his neck. She gazed down, not being able to look him in the eyes from the shyness she felt. Naruto brought a finger under her chin and raised her gaze to meet his own. She blushed prettily as her shy and shimmering lavender pearls met those soul-piercing azure blue eyes that held a calm storm in them. Her blush increased when she saw the small confident smirk on his face, and she averted her eyes to the side shyly. Her lower lip bitten softly through the left side, making her almost irresistibly cute in his eyes. He leaned down, his own lips brushing against her soft pink ones which opened slightly, and her breath tickled his own lips. "Do I scare you, Hin?" he asked, making her lick her lip unconsciously as his breath tickled her lips and she puckered them slightly. She knew he was always scared that he intimidated her in such positions, but she never felt scared of him. She could never feel scared of him. His dominating position made her feel all the more safe in his arms. "No," she whispered breathlessly. Her cheeks adorning the pink blush from the way her affectionate nickname that he used when only the two of them were there, slipped so smoothly of his lips. "Really?" he asked in a whisper, making her breath hitch at the proximity and how his hands slid slowly under her shirt and ran along the sides of her waist. Her nervous lavender pearls gazed into those fiery blue eyes she loved so much. "Really?" she whispered firmly, making him smirk slightly. His lips pressed on her soft pink ones and she too pressed them back. He closed the distance between their bodies by pulling her waist closer, and his hands ran underneath her shirt across her back. She let out a soft moan in their lip lock and her arms tightened around his neck. He completely dominated her and kissed her softly yet lovingly on her lips. He broke the kiss off softly, much to her disappointment, but he gave her no time to breath as he kissed her jawline ever so softly again. Her head craned back, giving him complete access, and he attacked her vulnerable neck. Soft butterfly kisses ran along her sensitive skin down to her collarbone. She let out yet another soft moan and ran her fingers through his hair. Those silky blonde locks she loved so much. Her breath hitched slightly when she felt his hands on her stomach making her way up, and she shivered in nervousness. "Naru," she said shakily in a moan, making his hands stop and pull out while holding her waist. Her shaky soft voice was enough to make him stop from doing anything she wasn't comfortable with. He put his forehead against hers and gazed into those shy eyes he loved so much. "I love you, Hen," he said simply, as if it was truest thing to him in the world. She smiled softly and her cheeks burned red, but she looked back into his eyes with such love it made his own stomach have butterflies. "I love you, Naru," she whispered, the words almost rolling off her tongue, and the smile he graced her with made her heart flutter. He only smiled that softly and lovingly when they were in their moments and all alone. His hand brushed her hair tied up in a high ponytail, now coming to her midwaist. He pulled her face into his neck and she snuggled in his arms quickly, his nose nuzzling her neck and taking in the sweet vanilla scent he loved so much. "You smell so lovely, Hen," he whispered, making her blush in embarrassment and hug him tightly. He smiled, feeling her embarrassment clearly rolling off of her. He felt her kiss his neck with her supple lips softly and smiled, holding her soft form in his arms gently. The two had gotten almost inseparable over the years. His 5 feet 4 inches form holding her almost 5 form in his arms. His soft teasing and ever-soft gestures had slowly turned into these intimate kisses and positions he sometimes pulled her in, and much to his and her own surprise she never pushed him away. Whenever he asked her why, the answer was the same. "I can never push you away" was what he always got, and it made him smile every time at the faith she held in him. She was still the same shy mess when it came to him, but she had gained a lot of confidence around others. No longer did she stutter with others. Though with him, it was there, albeit only sometimes now. Her body was also starting to develop as she grew. Her chest now B-cups drew the attention of several boys their age, but no one ever got close. His fiery glares were enough to send them on their way. "We should get to class," she whispered, giving his cheek a kiss, and he smiled, feeling it through his sensitive whiskers. "Let me hold you a little longer," he whispered back, hearing footsteps across the next hallway but ignored it. She giggled softly and nuzzled her nose with his softly. "What am I going to do with you?" she asked in her soft melodic voice, and he smiled, cupping her pink cheek in his palm. "Anything you would like to do," he whispered, making her cheeks burn red from his words. He chuckled softly when he felt her hit his chest and mutter "Baka." She broke the hug gently and caught his hand in her own with a small giggle. "Now come on, let's go," she said happily, and he smiled and allowed himself to be dragged along the hallways with the giggling girl. They reached their class while Hinata slid the door open, getting almost all eyes on them. "Go many Iruka-sensei, we didn't mean to be late," she said softly with a polite bow. The instructor smiled, though eyed her holding hands with the blonde, and nodded. He watched her pull him with her to the back row and went back to his charts of medical evaluations. This had become a common occurrence through the years. At least she kept the lazy blonde a bit in line, and from what he knew, their parents were well aware of their close friendship. Kiba watched the Hyuga heiress with a bright smile and that adorable pink blush, holding hands with the Namikaze, and couldn't help but writhe in jealousy. She had caught his attention when she had let her hair grow, and almost all the male population of the academy too had started noticing her rising confidence and skills. She wasn't like the fangirls in the academy. She took her training seriously but had her eyes set on the blonde, who reciprocated her feelings fully. They were the cutest couple in the academy according to the girls. He watched the two bangs framing her face waving and how she giggled softly, pulling Naruto along with her. He too wanted to be friends with her, but it was almost as if she didn't even see him when she was with him. And much to his chagrin, she always seemed to be with him. Menma watched his brother walk beside him and just ignored him, and Naruto didn't let his gaze linger on too long too. Everything had gone wrong just as Mito had feared at the showcase in front of their parents all those years ago, though the circumstances were nowhere near what she had expected. Flashback. All the parents and guardians were standing in the grounds of the academy for the showcase their children were going to give today. Everyone could see the excitement on their faces. Even the ever-stoic Hiyashi was smiling ever so slightly for seeing his daughter. Naruto sat by Hinata, his arm around her waist, holding her gently, with Sasuke sitting on his other side. They watched Hiruka, who was calling the names of several students. "Hinata, Hyuga and Ino Yamanaka," he called out, and Naruto smiled. He gave her a soft squeeze and nuzzled his cheek on her head, making her blush. "Go on and show them, Hina-chan," he whispered in her ear, making her blush slightly and nod. She stepped in the ring with Ino, who had a smug smile on her face. "Ha, I get the shy girl. At least I'll get to show Sasuke-kun how better I am than Billboard Brow over there," she said smugly, ignoring the cry of protest from Sakura. Iruka sighed and just waved his hand in front of them. "Hajime." His voice rang out and Ino dropped into her stance. Her eyes widened when she saw Hinata had rushed her and was almost by her side with her palm going for her stomach. It made contact and Ino felt the wind knocked out of her stomach. She was launched back and out of the ring like a rag doll. Choji poked her softly and shook his head at Iruka. She was out cold. "Shosha Hinata Hyuga," he called out, getting an applause from the crowd. Inoiki was rubbing his forehead from the shame he felt not only at the fight but his daughter's attitude. How had he let her become a fangirl? Was what he was asking himself. He was going to have a long talk with his wife if he had anything to say about it. Hiyashi was smiling like an idiot and bursting with pride. His daughter had destroyed the Yamanaka heiress in one blow. That was how a Hyuga struck. He glanced to the side when an elbow poked his stomach and saw the bubbly red-headed mother smiling too. "Aren't they adorable?" she squealed softly, making him quite confused. Though he saw Naruto hug his daughter and congratulating her, all the while she was blushing and stuttering her thanks. His lips pursed and he went into deep thought for a moment. Well, he is Minato's son and the Namikaze heir. At least she isn't associating herself with someone not of her own standing, and he is quite skilled too. He thought and nodded at the Uzumaki clan head curtly. "Yes, they do make quite a sight to behold," he said stoically, making Kushina smile. She was happy that Naruto was friends with Hinata, and from what it looked like Sasuke too, as she saw him put the boy in a headlock much to his protests. "Menma Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha," called out Iruka, drawing her attention towards the ring, and she smiled seeing her son enter the ring. Menma was grinning. This was perfect. Sasuke was the best after his brother in all the academy, and he could show everyone how much he had grown. Sasuke though entered with his usual stoic expression and entered the Uchiha clan's Interceptor Fists Taijutsu stance. "Today I'll show everyone I am the best," exclaimed Menma, getting cheers from many girls, and Sasuke just smirked at the challenge. "Let's see if you are anything like Naruto. This might be fun," he said with a smirk, making Menma's smile turn down, and he fell into his own Uzumaki Taijutsu stance. "Hajime!" rang the voice of Iruka, and Menma was off in an instant with a right hook to knock Sasuke out cold. Sasuke brought his arm up and blocked the swing, punching the redhead in his gut and launched him back. Menma skid backwards and coughed, feeling the rock-hard punch he had just endured, and glared at the Uchiha. Sasuke took the initiative and jumped up, twisting himself for a roundhouse kick which Menma ducked under. He flipped in midair and brought his other heel down, making Menma slide back to avoid it barely. Sasuke though didn't let up the push and swiped his leg in a horizontal arc along the ground to take his feet from underneath him. Menma tried to jump up but was met with an elbow to his chest and thrown backwards in freefall. He watched down in a wheezing cough, holding his gut where he had been stuck to see the ring's rope, and his eyes widened as he saw the Uchiha stand up, looking down at him. "Shosha Sasuke Uchiha." Iruka's voice rang out, and the stunned silence of the crowd was broken by Sasuke's fangirls who cheered for him. "HN. This was disappointing. You are nowhere near Namikaze. Guess there really is nothing alike about you and him, even your surnames are different." "This was a waste of time," he said in annoyance, and walked back to his seat to a slightly frowning Naruto. Menma clutched the dirt in his fist and clenched his eyes in agony, giving a hateful glare towards Sasuke and Naruto, who was sitting beside him. He felt like a joke in front of everyone and walked back to let the matches continue. His mother looked at him with a small sad smile and nodded for confidence, and he nodded back to assure her it was all right. "You didn't have to say that, Uchiha," Naruto said, making Sasuke huff. "It was the truth. He is nowhere near your or my level for that matter. I won't mince my words just to make him feel better. He's weak, and that's the truth," he said in an irritated tone, making Naruto sigh. It was true that Sasuke never minced his words, no matter how cruel they may sound to everyone, but as he saw the sad expression on Mito's face, he sighed. There was nothing he could do now. He heard his name being called out along with Kiba and decided not to prolong it. He wasn't in the mood to play around. His eyes turned to Tobirama, who was sitting on the edge of the roof. The white-haired man nodded, and he nodded back with a smile. "I'll wipe the floor with you, Naruto," exclaimed the boisterous Inuzuka, and he said nothing, just stood in his stance. The spar was short, and he absolutely destroyed Kiba and threw him out the ring quite pathetically without even breaking a sweat. "That my Naru-chan," Kushina chirped happily, making him blush a bit and rub his neck in embarrassment. It served to egg her on even more, and she embarrassed him further. Menma watched his mother cheer for him in jealousy when he was the one who wanted to be in his place. He glared at him heatedly, but the blonde was oblivious to it all and sat back with Hinata and Sasuke bumping his fists with the Uchiha. End of flashback. That was when the rift had formed in their relationship, and Menma started ignoring him and training harder than ever. He had maintained his place at the top of the academy quite easily. He sat down by the window, and Hinata sat beside him, glancing at him every now and then and blushing when she saw his cheek on his palm while he was staring at her. She nudged his shoulder to stop his staring, but caught her hand with his own free hand, making her look at him innocently with a blush. He brought her hand to his face and pressed his lips on the back of it, making her turn crimson. She pulled it back and slapped her hands on her cheeks while looking at her lap. He chuckled and ran his finger on her arm softly, making her squirm from his teasing touch. "No need to be embarrassed, Hina-chan," he said softly, making her smile softly herself, but it didn't do anything to make her redness go away. She caught his hand and entwined her fingers with his own to stop him. He gave it a squeeze, feeling her small hand in his strong grip, and she tried to concentrate on Iruka and look into those intense azure eyes. "All right, you all can go. Tomorrow you will be here for your graduation exams and team placements," rang the voice of Iruka as he stepped out, and everyone broke down in a chatter. Naruto saw her nervous eyes and pulled her closer by her slim waist. She eeped softly, much to his amusement, but he put her head on his shoulder and she sighed tiredly. "What's the matter, Hin?" he asked in a whisper only audible to her, and she smiled. He could always tell whenever she was troubled. "I want to be in the same team as you," she said, looking at him, and he smiled and nodded. He tucked a loose lock behind her ear, making her shy away cutely, and rubbed her cheek affectionately. "We will be, just you see," he said firmly, making her smile. He was so confident. She could feel as if she could take on the world if her was by her side. "What if we aren't?" she asked sadly, looking at her lap with a bitten lip. His finger rose her chin and he kissed her cheek, making her blush prettily and look at him innocently. "Even then we'll be together. Forever, remember?" he asked, and she nodded with a soft smile. "Forever," she whispered back as they stood up and walked back to their homes to get some rest for their next day. Senju clan compounds. There was a calm silence in the residence of Tobirama Senju this fine morning. He had let his disciple have a week off from training before the time for his graduation came. Only now did he see how accustomed he had gotten to the presence of that little blonde blur that had grown so much over the past years right before his very eyes. He sighed in nostalgia, and a smile full of pride burst upon his face when he thought about his student. He had really grown at a speed he hadn't thought possible in almost all the branches he had touched. The boy was pure gold when it came to learning the shinobi arts. The natural potential for them that all Uchihas held couldn't even begin to compare to what the blonde held within him. And he had exploited it to the fullest. He could easily say that amongst all the students he had taken on, in terms of pure skill and learning abilities, he had thrashed each of his previous ones in terms of the skill he held at so young an age. And that was saying something, since that list included the current Hokage, who was a prodigy himself in his younger days. His hands brushed the paper on the scroll in slow yet refined strokes to hone his calligraphy abilities. His senses tingled when he felt a person walking slowly and calmly to the glass door in front of him. He paid it no heed and went about the scroll in front of him, that same stupid smile that he just couldn't shake off no matter how hard he tried. "Thinking about your apprentice again, Tobirama-sama?" came the lazy voice from in front of him as the glass door slid open. His eyes finally glanced up to see the copy ninja making his way in with his casual lazy walk, reminding him of the same person he was thinking of. "Indeed," he said stoically, making the Jounin smile and take a seat when Tobirama motioned him for one. The white-haired Kage poured some tea in 2 cups and offered it to him, which Kakashi just kept in front of him. "So what brings you by to my residence?" asked Tobirama quite bluntly, making that same smile return to Kakashi's face. The man never minced his words and was always straight to the point. He respected that about him. "Came to talk to you about Naruto," he replied in his lazy voice, making the stroke of his brush halt halfway. His guarded eyes glanced up, making the Jounin shudder at the pure power he held in them and the protectiveness radiating off of him suddenly. The steel in his voice was unparalleled. "What is there to talk about him?" he asked stoically, though Kakashi could see how he had ordered him to answer it. "I've been assigned as his Jounin sensei. I've read through his file from the academy, and there are just simple skills along with a couple of surprising things in his behavior with other students," he said in his lazy yet serious voice. Tobirama stared into his eyes blankly, making Kakashi squirm like a child under his gaze before he gave a curt nod, making him stiffen. "I see," stated the Senju, and Kakashi breathed a sigh of relief when he picked his cup and took a sip of his steaming tea. "What does the file say, if I might ask?" he stated, making the Jounin nod and think for a few moments. "Rookie of the Year. Shows great potential in nin and taijutsu and can expel almost every genjutsu in the academy as if it was nothing. Knows a couple of high-ranking ninjutsu including the Shadow Clone Jutsu and surprisingly the Uchiha clan's Fireball Jutsu. Shows potential to be a really strong shinobi one day," he said, almost listing them effortlessly, and Tobirama hummed in approval. A ghost of a smirk swiped across his lips that didn't go unnoticed by the lone-eyed Jounin. Tobirama would have outright laughed had he not known how much the blonde had really shown in the academy. That didn't even scratch the surface of what the boy was capable of. "You don't believe it?" he asked, making Kakashi smile. "I don't think a student who has been under your eyes for 9 whole years would be capable of just that," he said, simply, making Tobirama smirk and nod. The cup made contact with the table and he looked straight into his eyes. "Sarutobi chose his instructor wisely," he stated, making Kakashi swell in pride. But he was going a bit wrong in his assumptions. "He didn't choose me, I requested the boy," he said, making him raise an eyebrow. "I've known the boy for quite some time now, be it watching over him when he was little or at the small visits I made at his house. A nice kid to have as my charge if I do say so myself," he said, making Tobirama smile and nod. It was all the more better. He decided to amuse the man and let him in on a few of the boy's abilities. "He's fast," he said, simply, making Kakashi tilt his head to the side in confusion. "I'm sorry?" he asked in a lost voice, making the Senju sigh. He never did like repeating himself. "Naruto, he's fast," he said, making Kakashi nod. The man was hailed as the fastest shinobi alive when he was in his prime, and the blonde's father held that title for quite some time too. So he assumed it was only natural the boy was fast. He is quite the troublemaker, so I assume he would be fast since only Iruka is able to catch him if we don't take Kushina-sama and you under the list," he said in deep thought when he met Tobirama's eyes and shuddered at the seriousness in them. "Don't take my disciple lightly, Kakashi. I've nurtured the boy with my own 2 hands and I know what he is capable of. That file doesn't even scratch the surface of what he is capable of if he ever goes all out," he stated blankly, and Kakashi gave a hesitant nod. He would remember to take him seriously in his test tomorrow then. "He doesn't trust anyone quickly, so be sure not to be too imposing on him." He hates being felt like he is being weighed or chained down even in the slightest, he said, and Kakashi nodded, keeping it in his memory for the future. He really should have taken the time to get to know the boy when he was little, he thought when Tobirama's voice cut his thoughts. He is my legacy, I couldn't be prouder to have taught the boy so much. No matter the path he decides to take, he is the son I never had, Tobirama said in a faraway voice, making Kakashi's eyes soften at the man. He hadn't seen him let down his guard down so much ever. You really do care for him, he said softly, making Tobirama snap out of his stupor and nod. Tobirama placed his hand on the middle of the table and pumped chakra into the small seal over it. The whole room was covered in kanji which glowed before disappearing. Kakashi suddenly turned serious at the privacy seal's activation and was giving the man his full attention. The boy has a secret that I think I could trust you with since you will be teaching him and be with him on missions, stated the Senju clan head, and got a nod from Kakashi. Tobirama sat silently for a few moments before he spoke up. He has sharp eyes, he said cryptically, making Kakashi narrow his eyes at the man. I know Kushina-sama always says how he takes in every little detail. He was cut off by Tobirama's voice. As sharp as your left eye, he said, and Kakashi's lone eye widened in shock and his jaw dropped behind his mask. Realization dawned on him as his stomach dropped a couple of pounds of weight instantly. How? He stuttered, making Tobirama shake his head slowly. That is a story for another time. This is why I said Hiruzen chose his instructor wisely, he said, getting a shaky nod from the silver-haired Jounin. No wonder the boy picked things up quickly, he had the legendary Uchiha clan's blood in his veins. They must have kept it hidden to keep the wolves away from him, he surmised instantly. He stood up when Tobirama deactivated the seal and made his way towards the exit before Tobirama called for him. Kakashi, he started, making the man glance at him curiously when he saw the man gazing at the half-filled cup and not looking at him. Take care of him, all right? He's a nice kid, he said in a rare soft tone, making the Jounin nod and smile. I will, he said simply and walked out, having gathered enough data about the boy to make sure he had his guard up when he would test the three tomorrow. He shivered when he thought of the chaos the news would make when the boy's secret would be unveiled and that Konoha had not one but two Uchiha blood members. He still had many questions, but he would find the answers to them in due time. Tobirama sat in silence, knowing the boy had enough skills to take care of himself and would get the needed experience now that he would go out and see the world for what it truly was. He smiled and shook his head when he thought how he was acting like a doting parent, knowing the boy was strong enough to take care of himself. He sighed, thinking he really was getting old. Meanwhile, at the Hyuga clan compounds, Hinata let out a cute yawn and sat up in her futon. She rubbed her eyes, glancing at the clock to see she was up quite early, and smiled. She was really excited and nervous for the day. She freshened up and remembered today all of them were going to become shinobi and change their attires completely. Her cheeks turned pink when she wondered what Naruto would be wearing. She shook her head and rushed into the bathroom for a shower to let out all the thoughts that were creeping into her mind about her adorable blonde. She stepped out of the steaming bathroom, clad in only a towel around her, and went for the closet. She took out her new clothes, letting the towel drop, and put on her undergarments. She picked up the fishnet bodysuit and put it on, her eyes turning to the white battle kimono placed on the dresser. Her face lit up and she picked it up before putting it on and tied the lavender sash around her waist. Her loose sleeves felt so nice. She tied the lavender ribbon to tie up her hair in her usual high ponytail. She went in front of the mirror and twirled with a giggle. Her thigh-length kimono had a small floral pattern in a matching shade to her ribbon, and she liked her new look. She put her finger on her chin and went into thought. She wondered what her Naruto would think. She blushed, knowing she always referred to him as her Naruto nowadays. Not that he minded in the least. "What are you doing, Ne-sama?" asked a voice from behind her, making her squeak out an eep and spin around. Her bangs moving with her, and she looked at the confused face of her little sister, who looked like she had just woken up. "Hanabi," she said, and sighed in relief that she hadn't come when she was changing. It made her quite uncomfortable to let anyone see her without clothes, with her shy nature ever present, and her little sister was no exception. She smiled when the girl walked up to her and put her head on her chest while wrapping her arms around her hips. She hugged her back and brushed her hair softly. "You look really pretty, Ne-sama," Hanabi said sleepily, and Hinata smiled. She broke the hug and crouched down to see her rubbing her sleepy eyes. She caught her chin and kissed her nose, making Hanabi's face scrunch up in irritation. She let out a giggle and rubbed her cheek softly, making the little girl smile. Her sister was so perfect in her eyes. She was skilled, strong, kind, and really pretty. Just she hung out with that annoying blonde she hated so much all the time. He wasn't worthy to be with her beautiful sister in her eyes. She caught her hand and pulled her elder sister with her to the dining room for breakfast, as her father had called her to bring her to him. She slid the door open to see Hiyashi frowning at her, and she blushed in embarrassment, looking down at her messy state. "Hanabi, go and get freshened up. That is no way to roam around the house in a half-sleepy state." His stoic voice rang through the house. She stiffened and nodded nervously when she felt a hand on her head and looked up to see the smiling face of Hinata. She smiled and ran off, leaving Hinata alone with Hiyashi, who motioned her for a seat. "Hinata, today is the day you graduate." He started and she nodded, taking the glass of orange juice and sipped it slowly. "Are you sure you want to become a Genin? The life of a Genin is dangerous. Especially for the heiress of the clan. You could start taking the clan matters." He was cut off by the soft voice of Hinata. It was rare for Hiyashi to be cut off, and it was usually only done by his elder daughter, who had grown quite close to him over the years. "To-sama, I want to be a Genin and get stronger. The experience in the world will help me grow, and there is still a lot I have to learn before I get involved in clan affairs completely," she said politely, making a ghost of a smile appear on Hiyashi's lips, and he looked at her in pride. "You speak wisely, Hinata, you really have grown," he said stoically, making her smile and nod. He looked at her attire and couldn't help but notice how much she had grown over the years, and now she was going to be a Genin. The elders were now silent, seeing her grow in both skill and personality. He stood up, confusing her, and she stood herself out of respect, as was the custom. He walked up to her and pulled her head into his chest and wrapped her up in a warm hug. "You have grown so much, my daughter. You look so beautiful, a spitting image of your mother," he whispered with a smile when she hugged him back and nodded in his chest. It was quite rare when he showed her this side of his, but he had opened up a lot, and she came to know he only wanted her to be strong enough so that the clan elders didn't trouble her. "Arigato, To-sama," she whispered when he cupped her cheeks in his hands to get a closer look at her. "Tell that idiotic Namikaze that he must take care of my daughter, or else I will have to remember that underwear prank he pulled on me," he said in a fatherly tone, making her giggle softly and nod. A moment later her eyes widened as she realized the meaning behind his words. He smiled and nodded when he saw she had caught up, and chuckled when he saw her face light up in pure joy. He had seen the team arrangements at the council meeting yesterday and had been adamant to know who his daughter had been placed with. He was glad with the choice of her teammates. She hugged him in joy and he patted her head softly. He and Naruto had an interesting relationship, to say the least. The boy respected him and he respected the boy for his heritage and skills. At first the boy showed no signs of respect to him, and he knew it was due to Hinata's harsh treatments. He was no fool when he saw the boy acknowledge him slowly when he and Hinata mended their relationship. He had a positive influence on his daughter, and he knew she adored the boy. Though he could do without those infamous pranks of his that, much to his chagrin, never had any proofs to link it to him, though the smirks on the boy's face next day always infuriated him to no end. She broke of the hug, and the dazzling smile she flashed him was enough to make him smile himself. He coughed to put on his stoic mask and looked at her seriously. "Be strong and keep the Hyuga name strong, Hinata. You represent the clan as our heiress, so make sure to hold yourself like one," he said, and she nodded though didn't hear him. He sighed knowing it already, and she bowed politely before hopping out happily. "I'm going, To-sama," she called out, and he watched her leave with a fond smile as she was going to take her first step to her new life. The elders had been furious when he had told them of his daughter's wishes, but had shut up when he had told them that she wanted to show the village the power of the clan and gain enough strength and experience before being involved in clan affairs. They had agreed reluctantly, saying she had to take up her responsibilities when she turned 18, and she had agreed to their terms. Hinata walked through the almost empty morning streets after waving to everyone in the clan compounds. Everyone had smiled seeing their heiress so happy. She felt her chest so warm at the thought of Naruto and her being on the same team. She watched her destination come in view and walked to it with a slight jump in her step. Uzumaki Namikaze clan compounds. Kushina was preparing her breakfast with Mito and Menma sprawled on the dining tables in a half-sleepy state. She was surprised when Naruto was the first one up, but she could see he was excited and smiled, looking out the window to see the boy lying on the back of his beloved polar bear. He had his arms crossed across the back of his head and knees crossed, one over the other, while Akira was nose-deep in the water. She couldn't help but gush inwardly at how kawaii he looked like that, with his eyes closed and the wind tickling his silky locks slightly. She was about to call him in for breakfast when she heard the door knock. "Coming." She called out and opened the door to see the Hyuga heiress, giving her a smile and bowing politely. "Ohio, Kushina-sama," she said in her soft voice, making the redhead smile and pull her in a bear hug. "Kami, you look so pretty, Hinata. And I'm glad you took my advice to grow your hair out. No wonder my baka blonde doesn't let you out of his sights," she gushed, cupping her cheeks, and Hinata's cheeks burned crimson. She herself twirled a bang, framing her face shyly. It was true she had grown her hair out when Kushina had told her to, and had also subtly yet slyly pointed out that Naruto loved her long red hair. "Come on in, let's get you some breakfast for the day," she chirped happily and pulled the indigo-haired girl along. Hinata smiled and walked in hand with the Uzumaki clan head, who she now viewed as her own mother and had grown quite close to her. And it was also why she had skipped her breakfast at home, knowing Kushina wouldn't let her go without feeding her herself. They walked in the dining room and Hinata's smile fell when she saw no speck of blonde hair on the table. Kushina though smiled seeing her crestfallen expression, already knowing the reason for it. "Hinata?" She called out from behind the counter and got a soft hi in return. "Why don't you go and call my baka blonde in for breakfast? He is out at the lake," she said with a sly smile, making Hinata light up and her cheeks turned pink before she ran out the glass door. Kushina giggled and started putting the food slowly on the plates, keeping her eyes out the window. Hinata ran out the garden and towards the lake in the middle to see her favorite blonde mop of hair glistening in the morning sunshine. "Naru?" She called out softly, but he heard her crystal clear and his eyes fluttered open. He let out a small yawn, making her blush at how cute he looked when he put his arm over his knee and turned his gaze to her. Intense azure blue eyes met her shy lavender pearls and her cheeks turned rosy pink when she saw the small soft smile grace his lips. "Hin." He called out softly in his own melodic voice and she blushed prettily and fiddled with the hem of her kimono, suddenly finding the pattern on it quite interesting to look at. He stood up on Akira's back, making the bear wake up from its slumber, and jumped, flipping in midair and landed on the shore with an elegant grace that made her heart flutter. She took in his appearance and all the blood rushed to her cheeks when she looked at him walking to her closely. His simple black t-shirt waving in the wind along with burnt orange pants. The black jacket he held on his left shoulder with the same burnt orange inner lining. Black fingerless gloves he pulled off and tucked in his pockets. She didn't know why, but with each step he took, she felt so nervous and couldn't keep her gaze at his intense eyes. They were like a calm, controlled storm that she couldn't help but adore. She looked down at her hands on her kimono when he stood a couple of feet in front of her. A hand cupped one of her crimson cheeks, making her look at him innocently as he closed the distance between them. She slid her arms around his firm chest slowly and put her cheek against it, hugging him tightly. Naruto wrapped her up in his arms and hid her within his embrace, kissing the top of her head softly. She snuggled in his arms when he kissed her head and tucked her face in his neck. "You look so beautiful, Hen," he said simply, making her cheeks turn tomato red in embarrassment. She smiled softly, feeling so safe in his arms, and nodded. She felt all her nervousness wash away with his little compliment and looked up to see his smiling face. She went on her toes and pressed her lips on his softly. He kissed her back gently and she relished in contentment. She broke the kiss off after a moment and looked to see him smiling so lovingly when he pulled her face in his neck and she wrapped her arms around his neck. She snuggled in the warmth he emitted and blushed prettily with a smile when she felt his hands roaming across her back softly, making her feel so fuzzy and warm. She felt something poke her in the side of her waist and looked down to see the brown eyes of Akira. She smiled when the bear nuzzled itself around her and purred happily. She pulled off the hug and crouched down, giving her a hug and rubbed the back of her ears, slowly getting some more purrs from the bear. "How are you, Akira-chan?" she asked softly and got a small sniff on her cheek, making her giggle and hug the bear happily. Naruto smiled seeing his summon so close to Hinata. She was one of the few who Akira let so close to herself. He chuckled when he saw Akira push her back with her weight and started taking sniffs all across her with small purrs. Hinata giggled and tried to pry off the adorable bear, who now was quite big compared to the little thing she was a few years back. "Alright Kira, that's enough." Naruto called her by her nickname and the bear got off and wriggled herself around her master. Her ruffled her head, making her purr and patted it couple of times, giving Hinata a hand to pull her up, who kissed her nose when the bear walked to her side before going back in the lake to cool down and take a nap. Hinata watched her submerge in the water with a smile when an arm slid around her waist and lips attacked her vulnerable neck. She let out a soft moan when soft kisses nipped her sensitive neck and she saw Naruto look at her adoringly while he kissed her soft cheek. He tucked her hair behind her ear and she shied away cutely when he tried to rub her cheek. "Let's go and have breakfast, Hin," he said simply, making her nod. She was too embarrassed with her red-hot cheeks from the kisses on her neck and cheeks he just made and walked with him inside, stealing glances at him every now and then to see him just come with a lazy smile like always. Kushina served the food and grinned, sitting beside the heavily blushing Hinata while everyone dug in their food. "So, how were the kisses?" she whispered, making Hinata's eyes widen in shock before she saw the window in the kitchen and her cheeks burn crimson in embarrassment. She slapped her hands on her cheeks to hide her blush and squeaked out something incoherent much to Kushina's amusement, and she giggled, pushing the plate to the girl who was happy for the distraction and ate, not meeting anyone's eyes in shyness. "So are you excited for graduation?" asked Kushina, getting a simple nod from Naruto and Menma while Mito squealed happily and said a loud hi. Hinata gave a meek nod, still not looking up from her lap when a hand came over her own, making her look at Kushina's smiling face. "It's alright, I'm glad you and Naruto are so close. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, I already love you like a daughter, Hinata," she said softly, making the heiress smile and nod in relief when Kushina gave her hand a squeeze of reassurance. Kushina herself knew the two were on the same team, having been on the council yesterday but didn't want to ruin the surprise for Naruto. Naruto finished up and picked up his plates when Kushina told him to leave it there. He picked his jacket up and put it on while fastening his gloves and walked out, his hands tucked in his pockets. Hinata excused herself and followed him as they left for the academy. Hinata walked with a bitten lip when Naruto's voice startled her. "What's the matter, Hin?" he asked, making her fiddle with her kimono and smile fondly with a small pink blush. "We are going to be on the same team, Naru, Tosama told me," she said softly, and he smirked. "I'm glad," he said calmly, his hand grazing hers, and she blushed. She knew what he wanted and entwined her fingers with his, taking his hand in her own. His hand felt so big and safe compared to her soft and small one. They walked in the academy hand in hand, and Naruto opened the door to their classroom. Much to the two's surprise, almost all the students were already there. Every boy's eyes turned to Hinata's new attire and started ogling her. Her kimono was hugging the developing curves of the girl quite nicely, making her the center of attraction for every boy. She hid herself behind Naruto, not liking the eyes on her, and his eyes instantly turned cold and murderous. They all flinched and looked elsewhere when they saw his protective glare. He walked up the stairs with Hinata hiding herself halfway behind him while clutching his jacket shyly. She loved how protective he was of her, it made her feel safe with him. He sat down at his usual corner seat with Hinata by his side. Sasuke made his way to them and sat by Hinata's side, ignoring all the glares the girl was getting because of him, courtesy of the fangirls. "Hey Hinata!" called out a voice, making her gaze to the side to see Kiba waving at her happily. She smiled and waved back. "You look really pretty today, Hinata," he called out, making every eyes turn to the two, and Naruto glanced to his side to see her just smile at him simply and nod. "Arigato Kiba-san," she said softly, and the boy grinned. Naruto looked away in annoyance, not liking why she was talking to the mutt. He felt a hand cover his own and glanced at the softly smiling Hinata. She scooted closer to him and put her head on his shoulder, making most of the girls sigh dreamily when he placed his cheek on her head and wrapped an arm around her waist. "I love you, Naru," she whispered softly, making him smile softly and give her a soft squeeze. "I love you too, Hen," he whispered, making her blush and smile when he kissed her head like a little child. "Get a room, you two," said a third voice, which was too loud in his opinion. He glanced back to see a pink mop of hair and threw her an annoyed glare. "Go and pester Sasuke, Haruno," he said in annoyance, making her bristle in anger. She wanted to tell Hinata off about sitting next to her Sasuke-kun, but she couldn't help but envy watching her adorable interaction with the blonde. She was the only girl the two would talk to since Sasuke almost denied their very existence in the world. Sasuke glared at him, which he ignored, and saw the pink mop of hair huff and walk away. Iruka walked in the class, making them all turn silent, and he read through the clipboard in his hands. "Alright class, almost all your skills have already been graded from the tests over the past year. Today you'll just have to go through the ninjutsu portion to pass the final exams. I'll call you all alphabetically, so come to the next class for your test." "Alright Me, please follow me," he said and walked out. "Pathetic, it is a waste of time," said Sasuke in annoyance, and Naruto couldn't help but nod in agreement. "Anyo, the basics are really important," said Hinata softly, making him grunt, and Naruto smirked, poking her stomach softly. "Really?" he asked in an amused tone, and enjoyed how she squirmed, trying to get him to not poke her, and blushed prettily. He ran a finger on her arm, making her feel so ticklish. She let out a giggle, and he pulled her head on his shoulder while she sighed happily. "You're too cute for your own good, Heim," he whispered, making her blush when he kissed her head, and she snuggled childishly. She heard her name being called and got up, glancing back to him when he gave her a smile, and she nodded. "Good luck, Hinata," said Kiba loudly, making her give him a small strange smile and nod. "Arigato Kiba-san," she said softly, turned to Naruto, who was just looking at her lovingly. He knew she wanted to hear the same from him. "You don't need it," he said simply with a wink, making her blush prettily and squeak in embarrassment. She ran out quickly, and he chuckled softly. Even Sasuke smirked slightly. "You're going to kill her from all the blood she stores in her cheeks when she is with Yanami-kaze," he said smugly, and Naruto smirked. "Jealous Uchiha?" he asked innocently, and got a glare in return. "As if I have better things to do than to hang out with girls," he said smugly, and Naruto smiled. "Oh?" he said in an amused voice. "I didn't know you swung that way, Sasu-chan," he said innocently, making Sasuke's cheeks turn red in embarrassment and anger. "I'm not gay," he growled out, making Naruto chuckle. Sure, he said, waving his hand dismissively, and Sasuke bristled in anger silently. Naruto watched her come back with the new shining headband across her neck and smiled, getting up. He walked to the door for his own turn and caught her hand when she was passing by. "Wait for me," he said simply, staring into her shy eyes, and she smiled softly before nodding. "Hi," she squeaked out shyly and ran out. He smiled, shaking his head and entered the room to see a smiling Iruka and a mildly glaring Mizuki. He knew he hated him, but he could care less about him. "Alright Naruto, please perform the Kawarimi," Iruka said, and Naruto nodded. He disappeared and a chair was in his place before he substituted back with it. Iruka scribbled down on his pad before smiling. "Alright, now please perform a henge," he said, and Naruto instantly transformed into Shisui before transforming back, and Iruka smiled proudly. "Both without hand seals, excellent Naruto. Now since we know you cannot do normal clones, please do any cloning technique you wish," he said, and Naruto nodded, holding a half-ram hand seal with his left hand. "Ninja art, multi-shadow clone jutsu." He called out and created 5 clones. Iruka couldn't help but smile in pride before jotting down his score and picking up a headband. "That was excellent Naruto, here you go," he said, putting the headband in front of him, and Naruto took it, running a thumb on the metal with a smile. "Congratulations, you graduate. Please be here after lunch for team assignments," he said, and Naruto nodded, fastening it on his forehead, and walked out. He stepped out the main door of the academy and saw his adorable girl sitting on the wooden swing and humming happily with short swings. He smiled and sunshined towards her back before pushing her gently. She brightened up when she glanced at his forehead and swung happily. "Congratulations Naru," she said happily, and he smiled, giving her another push. He loved the small giggles she was letting out and kept at it for a few minutes. Both jumped up on the branch of the tree and sat down. Naruto placed his back to the bark of the tree and smiled when Hinata snuggled by his side with her face tucked in his neck. He loved feeling her soft breaths and how soft she felt in his arms. Both closed their eyes, ignoring all the eyes that were glancing at them, and Naruto loved the small rays of sunlight between the leaves and the wind that bristled past them. Both didn't even notice before falling in a small nap. Several murmurs ran across the parents that had come to pick their children when they saw the Hyuga heir sleeping in the arms of the demon brat. "Oinamikaze! Wake up!" A voice called, and Naruto's eyes fluttered open and he glanced down at Sasuke. "What do you want?" he asked sleepily, making the Uchiha sigh. "You slept through team placements, you lazy idiot. I am placed on squad 7 with you and Hinata. Some Kakashi Hitake is our Jounin sensei," he said in his prideful voice, and twitched when Naruto just yawned and closed his eyes again. "Yeah, go and do something for a couple of hours then. Kakashi is late for almost everything," he said lazily so as to not wake up the girl in his arm while he brushed her silky hair that he had let out of the confines of her ribbon. "You know him?" came the curious voice of the Uchiha as he jumped up and sat on the branch while Naruto kept his eyes closed. Sasuke plucked an orange from the tree and started munching through it. "Yeah, he's a family friend. Apparently one of the best Jounins the village has to offer. Is lazy and perverted too. He is infamous for being late to almost everything that isn't really urgent," he said, and Sasuke sighed tiredly. "Great, now we have 2 lazy asses on our squad." He grunted, and Naruto kissed Hinata's head when she squirmed slightly and she snuggled in his neck to hide from the light falling on her eyes. The 3 sat silently as Sasuke too laid down on a branch above to wait for their sensei, having nothing to do for now. He pulled his headband over his eyes and went for a nap himself. Meanwhile at the academy, Kakashi strolled in the empty hallways of the academy almost 2 hours late and slid the door to the assigned classroom with an eye smile. "Yo! Sorry I'm late." You see, he stopped and sweat dropped when he saw the empty classroom in front of him. He walked out the main door and glanced straight at the tree in front of the academy, which had his squad sleeping soundly on it and sunshined on the branch. He crouched down in front of Naruto and I smiled at the adorable scene in front of him. His 3 charges looked so cute sleeping like this. "Yo!" he called out, making the 3 pairs of eyes flutter open. Hinata rubbed her eyes sleepily and Naruto too did the same while Sasuke rubbed his head. Naruto saw the masked Jounin and grinned lazily. "Yo! Kakashi-sensei," he said happily, making the Jounin eye smile and rub his head sheepishly. "Sorry I'm late, you see I got lost on the path of life," he said, making Naruto narrow his eyes at him. "Make up your own excuses," he said lazily, making the Jounin turn a bit sheepish. "My Naruto, well let's get introduced, shall we?" he asked, sitting down himself. Naruto saw Hinata look at him confused and he kissed her lips softly. "Me, you and Sasuke are on the same team and Kakashi is our Jounin sensei hen," he whispered, making her cheeks turn pink, and she nodded, shying away cutely when he tucked her hair behind her ear. "Why don't you introduce yourself first?" "We don't know anything about you," said Sasuke, making the Jounin nod with an eye smile. I suppose that's fair. Well, my name is Kakashi Hitake, I have lots of likes and dislikes which you are too young to know. As for hobbies, I have lots of hobbies. Dream for the future. Never really thought about it," he said lazily, and Sasuke grunted in annoyance at his stupid introduction. Hinata giggled softly when he turned to her with an eye smile. "Why don't you go next, princess?" he said, pointing a finger at her, and she nodded meekly. "Anyo. My name is Hinata Hyuga. I like cinnamon rolls, lavenders and pressing flowers. I also like, she whispered softly and glanced to the side and instantly averted her eyes with a blush when Naruto gave her a wink. Kakashi felt quite happy at their interactions. It would be quite nice for teamwork, he supposed. I dislike people who trouble others for any reasons they do not understand. I love training and taking care of flowers and spending time with Hanabi and Naruto-kun. I want to have a nice family and become a good head of my clan someday, she said softly, making the Jounin nod and eye smile. He turned his gaze up to Sasuke. You're up next, Emo Prince, he said, making the Uchiha glare at him heatedly for the nickname. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I like training and I dislike wasting my time and I hate fangirls. I like challenging Namikaze to a spar every now and then, I guess. My dream is not just a dream but an ambition. I'll destroy a certain someone and restore my clan, he said darkly, making Kakashi turn serious, and Hinata glanced at him worriedly. Naruto already knew who he was talking about and kept quiet. Kakashi turned to him, breaking out of his thoughts, and I smiled. Alright, my ball of sunshine, you're next, he said, and expected a glare but sweat dropped when Naruto yawned before nodding. He pulled Hinata to himself, who squeaked in embarrassment while he pressed her back on his chest. He put his chin on her shoulder and spoke up. My name is Naruto Namikaze. I like training with the old man, spending time with my Kachan and observing things, especially nature. I dislike people who hate things they do not understand and people who hurt innocent people close to me. I love my little kitten, he said, nuzzling his cheek with the pink cheek of Hinata, who was blushing prettily at his words. I dislike people who try to push me into doing things I don't want, I guess. I love studying history and seals and sleep in the places I love in my free time, he said, and Kakashi waited for him to go on but realized he was done. What about your dreams? He asked, making Naruto rub Hinata's stomach in thought while she felt warm and fuzzy from his tender strokes. Don't know, I guess get stronger and have my kitten in my arms all the time? He said, making Hinata's cheeks burn crimson, though Kakashi caught the meaning in his words. He doesn't have a dream yet. Tobirama-sama was right when he said he didn't like being chained down. A loose cannon for now then? He thought and nodded. Well, you three are all unique and have great potential. So now I should tell you of the real test tomorrow, he said, making them all look at him curiously with a bit of confusion. The graduation test was just to see if you three have the potential to be Jonin. Your Jounin sensei decides if you do become a Jonin or return to the academy for some extra training for another year. He explained, making the three nod. Figures, that graduation test was too idiotic anyway, Sasuke said, making Kakashi's sweat drop. He had expected them to get worried or blow up, but they were really surprising him today. Well, tomorrow morning you three will do a survival exercise with me. I'll decide who'll go to the academy and who remains a Jonin. Remember that this test has a minimum 66% failure rate, meaning only a third of your class's graduates will pass it. So I'll see you all tomorrow morning at 6. Johnny, he said with an eye smile, but stopped for a moment. Oh, and don't eat or you'll puke, he said, and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Sasuke jumped down and called out. I guess we'll meet at 8 then and have breakfast? He asked, and Naruto smirked before nodding, and Sasuke nodded back and walked away. He found Hinata turn around and look at him worriedly when she took out a handkerchief and started wiping the sweat of his cheeks and face. You had another bad dream? She asked softly, and he said nothing, just gazed into her shy eyes calmly. She had felt his erratic heartbeat and how he had perfectly masked it from everyone but her. She knew he had dreams because of his denet, and they haunted him almost every night. She kissed his whiskered cheek softly and rubbed it when he leaned into her touch and gazed at her lovingly. You can talk to me, she said softly, making him smile. He pulled her in a hug and brushed her long hair gently. He didn't want to talk about it. Just stay with me, Hen, he whispered in a small voice, making her hug him back tightly and nod in his chest. I'm here, Naru, I'm always here for you, she said in her soft voice, and he let out a small breath. He couldn't hide anything from her and told her about everything. She was the only one who knew it all he could do except Tobirama. He hadn't even let his mother in on some of the things he talked to her with. She soothed him with her gentleness and how he loved holding her like this. It felt so nice. I love you, he whispered shakily, making her smile. And I love you, she whispered, knowing how much he needed to hear it from her lips. He nuzzled his face and her neck. She felt her skin get wet slightly and felt him tremble in her arms. She ran her fingers through his hair while he cried softly in her arms, letting his heart out in front of her. She knew how much he was tormented from all he endured, whether he was awake or asleep, and she was glad he poured his heart out to her. Sometimes he would just sneak into her house for just a small hug and she would instantly know he was troubled, and they would stay the night snuggled in each other's arms. It was their little secret that she never wanted anyone to know. He stopped after a minute and she kissed away his tears and wiped his cheeks with her handkerchief. You feel better? She asked softly, and he nodded slowly. She rubbed his whiskers gently and kissed his lips softly. The small smile he graced her with made her have butterflies in her stomach as they relished each other's presence and watched the sun go down together, relishing in each other's arms. Uzumaki Namikaze households. The night was still, moon shone in all its brilliance with a clear sky letting its rays through the window of our blonde hero's window. The blonde himself wasn't so calm as his surroundings. He squirmed in his sleep, sweating and mumbling. His eyes clenched, his pupils dancing around wildly behind those closed eyelids. Ah! He gave out a short gasp and woke up with a start. He ran a hand through his face and looked at it with hard and heavy breaths. It was wet. He clenched his blanket in a tight fist and threw it aside in frustration. His soft and light footsteps made way downstairs. He walked in the kitchen and pulled out a bottle of water, gulping it down in one go. He threw it in the bin and kept his forehead against the fridge's door with a sigh. Why can't that damn fox let me have a normal sleep for once? He thought in frustration and annoyance. He felt a presence behind him and turned around on instinct when a pair of arms slid around him and wrapped him up in a warm hug. He instantly melted in the embrace and hugged the soft form of his mother back, brushing her crimson locks softly. "Another nightmare?" she whispered, running her fingers through his silky hair, and he said nothing. She cupped his face in her hands to see his eyes covered with red veins and his white regions in those eyes. It was clear he was struggling with sleep for quite a while now. "It's nothing, I wanted to train some before I went to Kakashi-sensei's test." He lied and didn't look into her violet eyes. She could tell he was lying. He was a terrible liar. That was one thing not even Tobirama had been able to train him in. He could lie stone-faced to people, but when it came to someone he was close to, his eyes always gave him away. She placed her lips on his cheek and gave him a heart-warming smile. "You're a terrible liar, Naru-chan," she whispered while stroking his whiskers softly. He leaned into her hand and smiled. His forehead was against her shoulder a moment later as she felt how tired he really was. She pulled him along with her and sat him on the couch, taking his hands in hers while her thumbs brushed the back of his hands gently. "You want to talk about it?" she asked warmly, and he looked down in sadness. "It's the fox," he whispered, and she closed her eyes in agony. She cursed her husband in the afterlife for the burden he had put on her son's shoulders at that moment. Both sat in silence. Kushina knew he didn't like talking about his problems to anyone and didn't poke the troubled boy too much. "You want to sleep? Maybe with me you can." She trailed off when he shook his head and her eyes saddened at his refusal. "Ka-chan." He spoke in his soft voice, making her perk up when she looked at his eyes that now held their usual spark in them. "Will you spar with me?" he asked simply, making her quite shocked. She saw his eyes that looked so pleading and her heart melted instantly. "Why?" she asked, rubbing his hand, and he smiled a little. "I like the rush of battle, it gives me complete focus and helps me to forget," he said, and she smiled and kissed his hands, giving him a nod. "Alright, let me go change, meet me outside, okay?" she asked, and he nodded. He changed into his shinobi clothes himself. He eyed the sword hanging on the wall within its sheath and debated whether to pick it up or not. A moment later he plucked it off the wall and strapped it horizontally on his hip and walked out in his black t-shirt and burnt orange pants, not bothering with a jacket. He stepped out into the ground and saw Kushina in a violet battle kimono with the Uzumaki symbol adorned on her obi, her hair tied up in a ponytail. She grinned when her eyes caught sight of the sword on his waist and stood in front of him. She realized it was the first time she was really going to spar with him alone after he had started his training with Tobirama. She joined in on their training sessions every now and then, but never really were they all alone like this. Naruto had the same thoughts running through his head. "Alright Naru-chan, you can use anything you like. Let's see how strong my adorable blonde has gotten over the years," she chirped happily, making him smile. His hands went behind him into his hip pouch and took out what looked like 2 kunais. His fingers flicked and 6 3-pronged kunais shone in the moonlight as his Sharingan blazed to life, making the darkness around them quite useless against him. He threw the kunais at her, making the first move, and his eyes widened in shock when she took off and unsheathed her own sword with a crimson almost black blade which tore through the kunais like butter and headed straight for him. His Sharingan picked up the slight twitch of her muscles in her arms and instantly ducked when her blade whizzed past his hair and he swiped his leg in a horizontal arc. Just like he had expected, she flipped sideways like a gymnast and he threw shurikens at her which were again torn apart effortlessly, courtesy of her blade. My Naru-chan, you certainly have your father's speed," she said warmly, making his cheeks turn pink in embarrassment and happiness while he smiled softly. It warmed his heart that she compared the likes of him to his father. Kushina had not really expected him to be quite that fast. Granted, she was holding back quite a lot, but from what she could tell from his still soft and calm breaths, so was he. And she had to admit, Tobirama had trained his battle instincts and honed his speed quite nicely. He stood up, dusting his clothes, and his Sharingan spun wildly as he smirked and felt his blood starting to get pumped. He loved this, the serenity he felt in the midst of a battle. It was like a drug to him. He was about to pull out a couple of kunais to aid him in taijutsu against his mother when her voice rang through the grounds. "Unsheath your blade, Naruto, let me see how much you've grown as a swordsman." He heard and his hands stopped. He brought his left hand back and brushed the hilt of his sword gently as if caressing it. Finally he gripped the handle wrapped up in white silk and pulled it out with a slick motion. Its silver blade let out a slight sparkle as opposed to the dark blade his mother wielded. He raised his hand back, a little over his head while pointing downwards to the ground, his legs a little apart for free footwork used in the deadly dance of Kenjutsu. Kushina rose an eyebrow at the strange stance. It had multiple holes from what she could see and he was completely open from the front with only his bare hand for blocking her strikes. She saw the calmness in his eyes and took her own Uzumaki Kenjutsu stance. Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath before he was gone in a blur. Kushina brought her sword up near her face to block the incoming strike and was about to counter it when her blade passed through thin air. What speed! She thought in admiration and swiped her sword elegantly to the side, his sword brushing along the ground while she saw his smile and sparkling eyes showing her how much he was enjoying it. Their blades clashed and created huge sparks while the grounds were filled with the sounds of metal clashing with metal. She blocked Naruto's relentless attacks effortless and she had to admit he was quite the swordsman. He had taken after her in this department, she mused, parrying another strike past her ear. She watched as he jumped back and fell down to a knee panting. She smiled, her sword by her side. She was not surprised by this however. With how fast and relentlessly he had been going on the offense for the past 10 minutes she knew this was coming. However, now let's see how good your defense is, Naru-chan. She chirped happily while he gazed at her with a raised eyebrow. His palm resting on the hilt of his sword for support. His senses tingled and his Sharingan blazed to life as he brought his blade in front of his face hurriedly when a chain erupted from the ground and it screeched, making contact. He backflipped multiple times when the ground started erupting with the infamous adamantine chains his mother was famous for, and he flipped again for a dodge and landed on the bark of a tree, standing on it. He ran up when chains followed him wildly and started jumping from tree to tree for his life, his Sharingan working in overdrive to predict and dodge her attacks while his senses were covering all his blind spots. He saw his mother smiling and standing calmly in the middle with a critical gaze and he growled. She was merely testing him. He dropped onto a branch, giving him a clear sight of his mother. His left hand parried a chain coming for his throat effortlessly with the sword while his right hand started making seals. Kushina's eyes widened in shock as she saw him make single-handed seals. His chakra control must be through the roof to do that. She thought in shock when he held a half-ram seal in front of his lips and breathed in a huge amount of air. Fire style, fireball jutsu, he shouted in strain and let out a humongous fireball where Kushina was standing. Her eyes narrowed at the red flaming ball coming towards her and her chains retreated back to her and crisscrossed themselves as a shield in front of her. The flames went around her harmlessly when she felt the cold steel near her throat. It's over. She heard a whisper near her ear and smiled softly. Really? She asked softly and Naruto pressed the kunai closer for emphasis, though his own eyes widened when she flickered away in a splash of water. A water clone? But when? He thought in shock when he felt arms slid around his waist and a pair of soft lips pressed on his sensitive whiskers in a gentle kiss. I'm so proud of you. Kushina spoke softly while she nuzzled her cheek over his. He smiled and sheathed his sword, slumping in defeat. She let out a giggle at his downtrodden expression and turned his gaze to her, placing her finger under his chin. What? You thought you would be able to beat me so easily? I am the most dangerous kunoichi in this village for a reason, Naru-chan. She spoke softly and he smiled a little sadly. Yeah, but you weren't even trying, just like the old man. He whispered the last part but she heard it. His Sharingan went out of life when she pulled him in the house and placed his head on her lap, as both were seated on the couch. She ran her fingers through his hair and saw his eyes close halfway when he let out a cute yawn and snuggled his face in her stomach. She felt his breathing even out into soft small breaths and the peaceful expression on his face making her smile and place her lips on his head for a soft kiss. He's grown so much, even though he didn't show it. I could tell he was holding back. That Kakashibaka is in for a surprise today, that's for sure. At least he has calmed down now. She thought with a giggle watching his adorable face as he slept on her lap and she kept caressing his cheeks with her fingers in soft strokes. The sun rose an hour later and she turned her gaze around to see the two sleepy redheads walk out and looked out to see the sun completely out now. Ka-san, why is Aniki sleeping on your lap in his battle gear? Asked Mito sleepily and she smiled gazing down at the blonde on her lap. Naru-chan and I had an early morning spar. He fell asleep after it though, you know your brother, she said with a giggle and Mito giggled happily herself. Yeah, he's always lazy and loves to sleep anywhere. That's my Aniki alright. She chirped happily while Menma went to the dining table without a word. Kushina didn't want them to worry about Naruto and kept his nightmares and reason for the spar to herself. She tapped his cheek lightly, making his eyes squirm as he came to. "Naru-chan, wake up baby," she whispered, and he snuggled his face in her stomach lightly. 5 more minutes," he mumbled sleepily, making her giggle. She looked on amused as she shook his shoulders lightly. "Come on my lazy bear, you have an early test today don't you?" she asked, and he snuggled even further to hide in her warmth and loved sleeping on her soft lap. "It's Kakashi-sensei, he's always late," he mumbled, getting another giggle from the redhead. She kissed his cheek and watched his sensitive whiskers twitch when she blew on them softly and nuzzled them with her nose. Finally he let out a cute yawn and his baby blue eyes gazed into the amused violet ones, and he smiled lazily. It was a really comforting nap and he felt himself quite refreshed now. He hugged Kushina suddenly as if his life depended on it, and she hugged him back worriedly. "Arigato," he whispered, and she smiled, her worries washing away instantly. "It's alright, now go for a shower and have breakfast before you leave," she said, caressing his cheek gently, and he nodded, giving her a peck on her cheek, and walked back to his room upstairs while Kushina put her sword back in her room and went to prepare some breakfast. She chopped through onions quickly when she felt something poking her hips softly and looked down at the brown eyes of the adorable bear who was purring softly. She rubbed his ears and patted his head, making the bear nuzzle itself around her, and she giggled. All right you adorable oversmart bear, you got me this time too, here you go," she said, putting some slices of boiled chicken for her in a bowl, and the bear ate happily while wagging its short tail in happiness. She let out a giggle when the bear hopped out and submerged in the lake to cool down, making her laugh as she watched her sleep nose deep in the water. Naruto sat at the dining table with Mito, chatting away about her sensei, someone named Yamato, and he listened on her excited squeals as she imagined her future missions. He ate quickly, seeing the time, and picked his jacket up. He kissed Mito's head and gave a peck on Kushina's cheek, making them both smile happily. He ruffled Menma's hair, who looked on annoyed as his brother treated him like a child, and the ever-calm smile on his face, and focused on his breakfast, though couldn't help the small smile that graced his lips at the small gesture from his elder brother. Training Ground 7. Naruto walked in the training ground. Kakashi had called them to 15 minutes late, and just as he thought, Hinata was already there. She was the reason he came this early. She could never be willingly late for anything, no matter what he said, and made his way to the adorable girl stealthily, who was reading a taijutsu scroll from her clan under the shade of a tree. Hinata kept on reading, completely engrossed in the scroll, when she felt a weight on her lap and pulled his scroll up a bit to see a pair of azure eyes watching her. She blinked innocently and the eyes blinked back at her. "Kya!" She yelped in shock and fumbled with the scroll in her hands. Naruto's soft chuckles rang throughout the clearing while she rolled her scroll neatly. She hid her cheeks with her hands, which were crimson in embarrassment at her reaction to his presence and the way he watched her adoringly on her lap. "Ohio-hen." He spoke softly, not wanting to startle her anymore, and she nodded back with a soft squeak. He smiled in amusement, making her look elsewhere in embarrassment when he took advantage and kissed her soft cheek. She turned a new shade of pink, and he smiled when she just ran her fingers through his hair and didn't meet his eyes. He closed his eyes and loved the softness of her lap and the way her fingers softly traced his scalp. His breathing softened and he went for a nap from the comfort of the soft breeze in the fields. He still didn't like why his mother had woken him up, and this was just great. Sasuke came and saw the scene in front of him, with Naruto having slept on the poor girl's lap, who was blushing madly at being seen like this. He sighed and jumped on the branch over them, seeing they still probably had another hour before their tardy new sensei came along. "Relax, Hinata, I won't tease or say anything about this." He spoke blankly to the embarrassed girl, who nodded meekly and sat there looking at the blonde on her lap lovingly. He looked so cute in her eyes sleeping like that. She cradled his head in a childlike manner while he snuggled in her arms. She could hold him like that forever, she mused, and smiled softly with a faint pink blush. They sat there for an hour while Sasuke, unknown to Hinata, had taken a small nap for making up to waking up so early himself. He always trained early in the morning and hadn't missed today either. This was the scene Kakashi saw as he crouched down on the tree's branch himself. "Yo!" he chirped, waving his hand lazily, and 3 pairs of eyes watched him in different ways. Hinata had a bright smile at seeing her sensei, which made him smile himself. Naruto just yawned while Sasuke watched him with narrowed eyes. "You're late," he said in an annoyed tone, making the yawn and rub his neck sheepishly. "Mama Sasuke, you see, an old lady needed help with her bags and then she forgot her address." He started but was cut off by the annoyed Uchiha. "Whatever," he mumbled tiredly, making the yawn and sweat drop. Those excuses took precious time and effort to come up with. No one appreciated the work he put in them, he mused sadly. The yawn jumped down, walking into the middle of the clearing, followed by his 3 cute charges, and pulled out a clock from the small bag in his hands. He set it onto a stump, and I smiled at the 3 curious yet confused Janan perspectives in front of him. "All right." He clapped happily, getting their attention towards him, and took out a couple of bells from his hip pouch. "We are going to do a survival exercise," he said, and sweat dropped as no reaction came from them, just innocent stares. "What are the bells for?" asked Naruto, and the man eye smiled at the blonde's question. These are your objective. You have to retrieve these bells for me through any means necessary, which means come at me with the intention to kill. He chirped happily when he saw the Shikunoichi raise her hand a little for a question. He nodded, motioning for her to go on. Anyo. Sensei, there's only 2 bells, she said softly, and he nodded, giving her another infamous eye smile. That is correct, Hinata, which means only 2 of you at maximum will pass this exercise and become genins this fine morning, he said, making all of their hearts skip a beat when his words rang through the clearing. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the man and spoke up. Konoha has always worked in 4-man cells. You're lying, sensei, he said, surprising the 2 by his side, who turned their eyes to their sensei. Kakashi couldn't help but be impressed by the blonde's inquisitiveness. He's a sharp one. He mused and waved his hand lazily. There have been many exceptions over the years, Naruto. Even 2-man cells have functioned if they were oiled well enough. You don't need to worry about that. The only thing you need to worry about are these, he said, pointing to the jingling bells in his hands which he tied to his belt. The 3 glanced at each other and then back at Kakashi while he felt the atmosphere amongst the 3 getting tenser by the second. Alright, you have until noon to get them. Your time starts, he said, and watched as they crouched down, and he tapped the clock on the stump. Now, he shouted, and the 3 were off in the trees, and he took out his book to see who it would be that tried to attack him first. The 3 ran through the trees and dropped by the shore of the river. Hinata fiddled with her kimono's helm nervously, biting her lip. What are we going to do, Naru? She asked softly, and he sighed as he sat on the boulder. His hand ran through his hair in frustration while he thought of something to rack them out of this mess. What else is there to do? The 2 of us who are most worthy take the bells by force and pass this stupid test. Sasuke muttered in irritation and froze at the glare that Naruto sent his way. And what about the 3rd one? He asked in a low voice, but Sasuke could sense his dangerous intent lying underneath. Sacrifices have to be made to walk forward. The weak deserve to be left behind and not carried as a burden by the strong, slowing them down too. He muttered, and Naruto's glare intensified. You would abandon one of us just to pass this test? He asked, and Sasuke merely shrugged. I will pass this test one way or another, so what do you say, Naruto? Let's team up and take them for ourselves. You know as well as I do the 2 of us will be unstoppable together. He asked, raising his hand forward for a truce. Hinata's shy eyes glanced back and forth between the 2 boys, and she chewed her lip as she watched Naruto raise his hand too. Slap. Sasuke rubbed his red hand that Naruto had slapped away and glared at him, who glared right back. You think I would abandon her just to pass this test and move forward? He asked coldly, making Sasuke smirk. You're letting your feelings for her get the better of you, Namikaze. Just think we could get the bells. He was cut off by the icy voice of Naruto. I'd rather go back to the academy than abandoning Hinata alone, he said, trashing the idea of the 3 of them working together when he saw the greed and hunger in Sasuke's eyes and knew he wouldn't agree for it. Whatever, I'd get the bell myself. See for yourselves as she will still be left behind, he said, and jumped back in the trees. Hinata knew those 2 were stronger than her and had much more diverse techniques. She was heavily reliant on her Juken, and she would most probably be the one left behind. Her eyes prickled with tears at their corners when she was pulled gently in a warm hug. She sniffled softly as Naruto kissed her eyes off their tears and gazed into her eyes with his own fiery azure ones. Don't worry, Hin. We'll get a bell and go ahead together, I promise. I am not leaving you behind no matter what, he said softly, and she nodded with a soft smile. He never broke his promises, and she was glad he was with her as she hugged him back with happily. But what about Sasuke? She asked in a sniffle, and he smiled, petting her ponytail softly. We'll get him too somehow. He is on a high horse right now. Let's just focus on doing our best, alright? I'll figure something out, he said, and she smiled, wiping her face with her sleeves. He jumped ahead and she followed him as he started to work on a plan to trap the Jounin in. Sasuke sat on a tree while he watched the calmly reading Jounin. He took out 3 kunais in his left hand and shurikens in his left. This is it, he thought, and threw the kunais one after the other while Kakashi merely jumped back a little with each one. He launched the shurikens which swung at the Jounin while he merely sidestepped with a small jump. His lone eye widened in surprise when he saw another kunai land in front of him and cut a hidden wire. A trap? He thought in surprise, and dodged a hail of kunais from his side and tripped another wire, making a hail of shurikens launch from his left. Impressive, he thought, and the shurikens made contact. Sasuke smirked from his hidden point but let out a growl when a moment later a log fell in place of Kakashi and jumped out in the middle of the clearing. You really are a brave one, I'll give you that, Sasuke. Kakashi spoke non-chalcedony, leaning on a tree behind the Uchiha, and flipped a page on his book. I'm getting a bell no matter what. I won't stop until my goals are fulfilled. He spoke blankly, and Kakashi let out a perverse giggle and flipped another page. Say that after you've gotten a bell, Sasu-chan. He goaded the boy on, and Sasuke growled. He jumped back and rushed the Jounin, engaging him in taijutsu. He jumped up and pushed his heel for the Jounins, who blocked it with his arm. Sasuke brought his left leg on the other and Kakashi brought up his other hand and caught both feet deftly with a slight wince. The boy has some strength, I'll give him that. He mused, and his leg came up to block the boy's fist while he watched the small smirk that graced his lips. I've got you now, he thought, and swiped his free hand that held a kunai at his belt, and Kakashi's lone eye widened. He rushed back, but the kunai made contact with bell, slightly letting the jingling of its metal run across the clearing. Kakashi slid back and put his book back in pouch, narrowing his eyes at the scowling Uchiha. He's fierce, he mused and stood up, dusting off his clothes lazily. Looks like I won't be reading my back today, he muttered glumly, making Sasuke frown. You better take me seriously then, he shouted, making Kakashi raise an eyebrow. You give yourself too much credit. Just because you're different doesn't always mean you're better, he said wisely, and saw the raven growl menacingly. He went through hand seals immediately and took a deep breath, ending at tiger. Fire style, dragon flame jutsu, he exclaimed, and Kakashi's eye widened in shock, clearly not expecting a jutsu of that magnitude from the boy. The narrow stream of flames made its way towards Kakashi and tore apart the tree behind him that fell when a hole was bored through its center. Sasuke smirked, panting heavily at the chakra drain when a couple of hands caught his ankles, making his eyes turn wide. Ah, he gasped when they pulled him down and he was buried neck deep in the ground. He watched Kakashi pull out in front of him and dusting his clothes off as if nothing had happened at all. Shinobi battle skill number 2, ninjutsu. That was earth style, headhunter jutsu, he said happily, making the Uchiha throw him a death glare. You know what they say, the nail that sticks out gets hammered in first. In this case it was quite literal, get it? He asked playfully with a chuckle and laughed lightly at the murderous aura surrounding the boy. He ignored the raven and walked out, leaving a fuming Uchiha behind. Naruto and Hinata sat in the trees, having watched Sasuke's display of skills and Kakashi's easy win quite closely. You ready, Hin? He asked, and the girl nodded meekly, still quite nervous seeing how Sasuke had been obliterated so easily. She felt a pair of lips press on her lips and felt Naruto stroking her soft cheek tenderly. It'll be alright, don't get nervous, okay? He asked, and she nodded, the confidence in her eyes shining brilliantly now. He smiled and jumped down, starting his plan. He walked in the middle of the clearing where they had started to see Kakashi there reading his infamous orange book. He looked up to see the blonde coming in calmly and rose an eyebrow. You've come alone, Naruto? Sure, have gotten confident, all grown up I guess, huh? He asked playfully, and the blonde said nothing. Kakashi snapped his book shut to see the potential the blonde held, and seeing the disciple of Tobirama Senju in action for himself. Naruto breathed a long breath and started taking off his jacket, making the Jounin stiffen. Naruto motioned to put his jacket on the stump, and the Jounin nodded, waiting for some plan, when he saw the blonde stand in front of him and loosen up his arms. Shall we get started? Naruto asked, and the Jounin nodded with an eye smile. Naruto caressed his sword's hilt and unsheathed it in a slick motion. Kakashi eyed the sparkling silver blade with cautious eyes, seeing how well cared it looked to be. His father being the White Fang himself, he knew a lot about the deadly art of kenjutsu. And the sword always showed how true a swordsman was to the art. Naruto disappeared in a blur, his Sharingan blazing to life instantly. Kakashi's eye widened in shock and his jaw dropped at the amazing speed the blonde possessed, and ducked down the swipe that whizzed past his head from behind. He chucked out a kunai and turned around to see the blonde already gone from view and blocked a swipe to his neck on honed instincts alone. He decided to take it seriously lest get cleaved in half by an academy student, and parried the blade aimed for his waist to the side. He swiped his kunai for the blonde's arms and smiled beneath his mask to see the blonde's eyes, making no effort at dodging. His eyes widened when he saw it sail millimeters past the intended target and jumped back from a swipe aimed for his stomach. He blocked a vertical slash with his two kunais in a crossguard over his head and swiped his left one to the blonde's stomach to see him miss again by only a small hair length. He saw the small smirk on the blonde's face as if taunting him, and narrowed his eyes on the boy. What the hell is going on here? He thought when the blonde charged at him headstrong, and for the life of him Kakashi couldn't believe how he was being pushed back on the defense. He threw the useless kunais that had taken numerous hits to the side and chucked out new ones to raise them in a crossguard yet again. The metal clashed with metal in sparks, and Kakashi had to admit he hadn't had such a good straight fight with any Genin in years. He swiped them in a cross arc, yet again missing by a hair's length, and growled, "This is getting annoying," he thought in irritation when he saw the blonde backflip and land gracefully while his breathing was heavy and sweat glistened his face, but his eyes sparkled in happiness at the great fight he was fighting. Naruto's eyes traveled into the trees for a moment when he saw a glimpse of those lavender pearls and turned his eyes back to the Jounin, sheathing his blade. Giving up already, Naruto? I was beginning to have some fun, Kakashi said lazily, though hadn't meant it inwardly. The blonde was pushing him to high tuning speeds already and he cursed himself for slacking off on training after retiring from the Black Ops. I really have to get myself back together, this is embarrassing. To be pushed by someone who isn't even a Jinan? Should I use my... He thought, bringing his hand up to his forehead protector, and noticed Naruto stiffen and instantly put his hands in a cross-hand seal. Ninja art, multi-shadow clone jutsu, he exclaimed and formed 10 clones that started covering him. Kakashi rose an eyebrow at the panting blonde who was exerting himself heavily in this fight. Now, you're getting sloppy, Naruto. Wasting chakra on clones to increase your numbers won't be enough. I've had experience in a war to go against multiple foes at once. This jutsu won't help you, merely lead to your downfall. He admonished, but was on his guard as he saw the blonde ever calm without a hint of hesitation in his actions, as if he was in complete control of the battle. Just like sensei. He thought in nostalgia and ducked down under a clone's roundhouse kick and caught a punch from another by his side. He pushed them a bit and slid back to block fists from the other two and watched the rest cover him from behind. His eye roamed around and narrowed as they were closing in on him slowly with their coordinated movements, as if it was what he had planned. What is his next move? Is he planning to pile up on me with clones? He thought, and much to his surprise all 10 of them rushed at him, and he glanced at the original, who stood back with his smirk widening slightly. Naruto brought his left hand to his chest in a half-ram hand seal, and Kakashi's eye widened in horror as he saw the clones glow unnaturally. Oh shit! Boom! The entire clearing felt the shockwave from the explosion as a smoke cloud rose above the tree cover. Hinata went through hand seals as soon as the clones started glowing and veins popped around her eyes. Byakugan, she whispered and focused all around her, holding her hand in a half-ram hand seal, and smiled as she let out a pulse of chakra. Kakashi, who had just narrowly substituted from those deadly clones, stood on a branch when his eyes caught the glowing seals over the tag on the bark of the tree by his side. Oh shit! Boom! He substituted another time and stood on a tree to see another tag slapped near his feet, and sweat dropped. Hinata was tracking his movements with her Byakugan and activating the tags as soon as she saw him land near one. This had been Naruto's plan. To distract him long enough while she set up the trap and boxed him in the perfect position before they went all out. She let out another pulse of chakra as soon as her eyes caught sight of Kakashi's substitution. Boom! 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 The clearing was racked with a series of perfectly executed explosions, while the jounin in question who was targeted could do nothing but substitute for his life. He didn't understand how the hell these kids had come across so many exploding tags, but he would be having a word with their chosen weapons shop after this. Finally, he landed in the middle of the clearing to see the panting blonde standing there with his sword sheathed but 2 3-pronged kunais in his hands. He raised his forehead protector and Naruto dropped into his stance, seeing his sensei was getting serious when Kakashi sidestepped as a palm strike passed harmlessly by his side. Hinata went on the charge and swiped a kick for his chest that he slapped away and glanced the palm for his stomach to the side effortlessly. Her eyes widened at seeing her Juken being countered so easily, and she stumbled when he let her hand overreach its intended target. He poked her neck with his 2 fingers gently and let out a pulse of lightning chakra, making her Byakugan deactivate and eyes roll back. She fell unconscious in a soft heap while he ducked under the swipe of a kunai and blocked the kick that followed easily with his right hand. His Sharingan glared menacingly at Naruto, who glared right back without a flinch. For Kakashi, the force behind his kick was nothing compared to Guy's, and much to Naruto's shock he pulled him towards him by his feet, and Naruto slipped and fell down on his back with a gasp of pain. He saw Kakashi stand over him with his mismatched eyes watching his down form blankly. "You did well, Naruto, better than I had expected. Now stay down," he stated compellingly, and Naruto started making seals with his left hand. Kakashi stomped on his wrist with a foot and Naruto screamed in agony as he applied pressure over it. "Give up," he spoke in a commanding voice as he saw Naruto grit his teeth in pain and think of some way to win. Kakashi saw him racking his mind and sighed inwardly. The boy was too damn stubborn like his mother to give up, and did the same to him as he did to Hinata and knocked him out. Kakashi let out a soft sigh and pulled down his headband, smiling beneath his mask in pride. "The boy is something else, to push me this far," he thought proudly, and picked him up over his shoulder and Hinata tucked under his arm. He placed the 2 by the stumps and took out Sasuke and tied him to the stump with a rope, who struggled to no avail. Half an hour later the bell rung and Naruto and Hinata came to consciousness. Naruto winced and rubbed his sore wrist, which Hinata noticed immediately and gasped. "Oh Kami, you're hurt," she gushed and took his wrist in her hands gently, ignoring the amused Kakashi and Sasuke by her side completely. Naruto watched with a warm gaze while she applied some ointment over it and started wrapping it up in bandages. "You alright, Hin?" he asked softly, and she nodded with a soft smile. "Hi," she squeaked in embarrassment at his loving gaze and focused on the bandages. Kakashi coughed when she finished making them look at him sheepishly, and he smiled. He chucked a kunai at Sasuke and cut through the ropes instantly. Said boy rubbed his arms at being free and grunted in annoyance at being tied so tightly. Tink tink. The sound of jingles rang through the clearing while Sasuke and Naruto gazed at the bells in their hands that Kakashi had thrown at them and then back at their sensei who was smiling at them. What's this, sensei? We failed, didn't we? Naruto asked while Sasuke stared curiously too. Kakashi shook his head slowly, confusing them. The test was never for the bells, Naruto, he said, confusing them, and continued on. It was to test your skills and see if you three were worthy to be Genin. He explained and then nodded slowly. Naruto looked at the scared face of Hinata and his heart clenched at the sight of her quivering lip. Why not Hinata? He asked softly, making Kakashi sigh. Let's see what you all will do now. He thought, looking at the three calculatively. She didn't have what it takes to impress me like you and Sasuke did. That is all there is to it. I'm afraid she'll go back to the academy. He explained, and Hinata clenched her eyes shut, making her unshed tears roll down her cheeks, and Naruto clenched the bell in his hand at the sight of her tears. Tink. Kakashi looked at the bell in his hand and then back at the blonde who would throw it to see him embrace the crying girl in his arm, pulling her onto his lap. He tucked her head under his chin and glared at the confused Kakashi defiantly. If Hinata's going back to the academy, then so am I. She deserves this as much as we do. I promised her we would go forward together and I never go back on my word, for that is my ninja way, he said confidently, making Kakashi's heart skip a beat at the confidence in his eyes. Sasuke looked at the bell in his hand and clenched his fist and jaw. I'm so damn stupid, he thought in annoyance. Tink. Kakashi looked at the second bell in his hands and then back at Sasuke, who was looking to the other side with a scowl. Don't look too much into it. I want a worthy teammate with me, and these two are the best there is who won't hold me back. I'll train for another year and get closer to my goals, and I'll be damned if I let Namikaze have a whole year for training while I am on some missions. He muttered in annoyance, making Kakashi shocked to the core. He hadn't expected Sasuke to throw away a chance at gaining strength for anyone else's sake in years. Naruto caught him under a headlock and pulled him in with a chuckle. Oh, you just can't be upfront about your feelings, can you, big bad Uchiha? You're too soft and don't want to leave poor old me alone, he teased in a cooing voice. Hinata giggled, wiping her tears, watching Sasuke try to wriggle out and yell curses at the blonde who was laughing wholeheartedly. Kakashi raised his forehead protector with softened eyes and watched the three's interaction with warmth in his heart. Are you seeing this, Obito, Rin, Minato-sensei? Finally, I can move on, he thought, pulling down his headband and coughed to gain the attention of the three. Sasuke was on top of Naruto ready to punch his lights out while Hinata tried to stop the two, and Naruto was chuckling happily. Is that your final decision then? He asked, and watched them sit up and nod with hardened eyes, and he glared at them intimidatingly to see them fiddle a bit, and I smiled. Then you all pass, he said happily, getting lost looks from the three. Huh? The three said intelligently in unison, and he chuckled with a nod. You pass. The test was to see if you were willing to put your comrades over your own preferences. Each of the previous teams I tested stuck to the rules and abandoned their comrades, he said, walking to the memorial stone with a sad gaze. The names of my best friends are engraved on this stone. Remember your first and most important lesson from your sensei. In the shinobi world, those who break the rules are scum. That's true, however those who abandon even one of their comrades are worse than scum, he said, getting looks of admiration from the three who nodded. Alright then, Team 7 is now official. Meet me at the same place we met for team introductions tomorrow at 9. He was cut off by Naruto. You mean 11? He asked lazily, and Kakashi smiled and waved his hand. Johnny, he said, and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto and Hinata stood up along with Sasuke, who tried to go off on his own but was again in a headlock, courtesy of Naruto. Oh no you don't, let's go and have lunch together, he said, pulling the Uchiha by the collar who was yelling curses at the blonde while Hinata ran up to catch up to the two, giggling happily at her new teammates' interactions. Uzumaki Namikaze households. The usually chirpy and full of life residence to the family of our blonde hero was unusually quiet tonight. There was only one person in the house, sitting quietly and going through the ninjutsu scroll unfurled across his lap. Menma's violet eyes burned the scroll in his memory, his mind kept keenly on the scroll in front of him. He had to learn this, if he wanted to surpass his elder brother in strength. He let out a sigh, when his mind wandered back to the blonde brother of his. No matter how much he trained or tried, his brother always seemed to be a step ahead of him. Plus, he did all of that while being his lazy old self he always was. He had taken his training seriously too, and he knew he was quite strong, but he knew if he was to go against Naruto, the blonde would beat him to the ground and then some. And that thought burned him up. He admired him, but he didn't want to be always in his shadow. With a new vigor, he glared daggers at the scroll on his lap. This was why he had refused to go along with his mother and sister to the gathering of clans at the Inuzuka clan compounds. As soon as he had heard that Naruto wasn't going, and was instead going to his master for extra training, he had done the same in hopes to catch up to him. He wasn't going to let the distance be increased between them anymore. His eyes glanced to the glass door in the living room that led to their open grounds, when he thought he saw something whiz past there. His eyes lingered on over the door for a moment longer, before he shrugged it off as the wind blowing past and started reading his scroll again. Once more he saw something whiz past the kitchen window, and this time he narrowed his eyes there. He turned around in the blink of an eye, back towards the glass door when his ears picked up another whiz. He walked to the glass door and stepped out, his eyes darting around nervously. His gut feeling was telling him something was wrong. He stepped in the middle of the training grounds, and looked around the clearing in between the trees. The silence in the compounds was now impalpable. He knew in his heart that he was surrounded and in trouble. He flicked out a kunai and darted his eyes around sharply, trying to take in as much detail as could, given the low amounts of light in the moonlight-covered field. "I know you're here, no point in playing hide-and-seek. You cowards better show yourselves," he shouted loudly. He looked around to see if his taunt had worked, and sure enough in a second 4 flickers were seen in front of him. Menma stiffened and dropped into a guarded stance, seeing the 4 people that were standing in front of him. All of them were wearing black cloaks. But what made his heart skip a beat were their masks. Blank masks with strange designs like he hadn't seen ever before, with the leaf Anbu symbols over them. He eyed the 4 warily. The middle one was a kunoichi, judging from her brown long hair and her bodily features. He grew especially nervous when he saw the behemoth of a man by her side. He was almost 7 feet, with a huge muscular build for crying out loud. The rest 2 weren't so intimidating, but seeing they were Anbu, he was pretty sure they were quite formidable too. The kunoichi, their squad's leader as he suspected, stepped forward a step in front of her team. "Menma Uzumaki, we request you to come with us peacefully," she said in a monotone voice, making him stiffen. He was pretty sure they weren't Leaf Anbu, because they sure as hell didn't hold themselves like these machine-like drones. "And why would I do that?" he asked, running numbers through his head. He was cornered. They were 4 Anbu prepared and ready to capture him, while he was all alone. Even with all his skills, he was sure he wasn't going to be able to hold off all of them at the same time. There was a reason they were called elites after all. The odds were completely against him at the moment. "Our master wishes to see you. Please escort us peacefully," she said in her same blank voice, and he gripped his kunai tightly, bringing it up to his face. "And if I don't?" he asked nervously, though already knew the answer. The kunoichi stared at him silently, before glancing at her teammates and nodding curtly while looking back at him. "Then we are to bring you in by any means necessary," she said in her drone-like voice, throwing aside her cloak to reveal her slim and feminine body, covered by the standard Anbu uniform used by others in the village. He did note the lack of the Anbu marks on their arms though. He looked at the others. The brute swung off a huge blade, almost as big as Menma himself from his back. The third one took out 2 blades and attached them to his forearms, and the woman herself flicked out a simple tanto. He gulped nervously when the tension around the clearing became thick, which the kunoichi broke in her monotone voice. "Do not wound him fatally, master wishes to see him alive and well," she barked out compellingly, making the 3 others nod in unison. Menma took a step back and brought his kunai up to block the deadly metal stars that were being aimed at him. He blocked them quickly and jumped to the side, failing to avoid the slight gash the Anbu with the strange forearm swords made. He couldn't believe how quick they were. At this rate he would be hard-pressed to defend himself, let alone go on the offensive. He ducked down a large swipe from the blunt-edged blade, being swung over him by the brute. He crossed his arms in front of him when the kunoichi and their team launched a kick to his face, but was launched back harshly from the pure strength behind it. His back met the tree's bark roughly and he coughed out wheezingly from the impact. The redhead opened his eyes, and focused his dimming vision back to life. He glared at the 4 standing there calmly and readying their blades for the next bout. His hand wiped the dirt off his face, and he stood up with a deep breath. "All right, that does it," Ka-san and Jiraiya said. "T only use it if I was in a life-or-death battle. I guess fighting 4 Anbu by myself can be considered that," he thought and smirked. His eyes closed on themselves when a light yellow sheen broke out around him. The Anbu stiffened when they felt his rising chakra levels, and they all surmised instantly what was going on. He was drawing on his extra reserves now. Menma brought his hands up and clasped them in a snake seal. "Ahhh," he roared and raised his chakra a little more to activate his ability. The yellow sheen around him covered him completely, and added a little glow to his whole body. His unruly crimson hair flailed around when his eyes turned into slits. "Would release, would flow spears," he exclaimed and pushed his palms forward. Wooden spears shot out of his sleeves, and made their way straight to the four Anbus, who stiffened slightly. Each of them brought their blades forwards and blocked them efficiently. Menma pushed some more chakra, and launched even more deadly spears at them in rapid fire. His eyes widened when he saw them cleave through his jutsu like it was nothing. "The boy is making too much ruckus, let's put him down." The lead kunoichi barked out to the brute, who nodded in agreement. Menma noted the four weren't trying to use jutsu at all, most probably to attract as less attention as possible. So this is how Anbu fight. He couldn't help but admire their pure skill and held his snake seal with shaking hands from the force he was exerting. The brute made a beeline for the redhead. Menma saw him jump up and pull his sword back, hiding the blade and making it a deadly jackhammer in the process. He knew the only jutsu that had a chance of blocking it was the one he was still working on currently and was reading a moment ago. He pumped up his chakra and glared at the incoming attack defiantly. He wasn't going down without a fight. "Wood style, wood locking wall," he exclaimed, and thin pillars of wood broke from his feet, and started clasping together in a makeshift wall. Menma grimaced at seeing the results. It was supposed to be a perfect shield, but his was just a wooden thing right now. The blunted edge of them made contact with his shield and impacted with a huge bang. Menma was blown back, when his jackhammer-like blade made contact with the ground, and the shock wave alone threw him back like a rag doll. His blurry eyes focused into his front only to see the Anbu with the forearm-like blades rushing to him, most probably to knock him out, and a volley of shurikens incoming from his other side to knock him out. He knew he was done. There was no way he could possibly stop both of them, and closed his eyes in defeat. The Anbu knew it too. Clang, 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 slash, clang. The voices rang throughout the clearing. Menma's eyes snapped open to see the back of his brother standing in front of him on the hilt of his sword, his arms crossed and his silky blonde hair flowing slowly in the wind. He glanced down to see the tip of his blade, having embedded the shurikens right through their holes and into the ground. They stopped their spinning a moment later. He heard a slight grunt and saw past his brother, only to see the Anbu with the strange forearm blades clutching his left shoulder, that now had a deep gash on his right bicep and was bleeding profusely. He saw the four jump back and regroup at seeing this new development, and turned his eyes to his brother, who jumped down and pulled out his sword from the ground, holding it to his side, making the blade shine slightly in the moonlight, making him quite an intimidating sight to behold. "Show off," he muttered in annoyance with a pained gasp, feeling his swollen waist, and stood up shakily. Naruto smirked hearing his brother's first words, and was glad he was all right and fit enough for his snide remarks too. "I leave you just for a couple of hours, and you bring four unknown Anbu to fight in the house." His lazy voice drawled out, making Menma's eye twitch at his words. He stood up fully and took his brother's side while flicking out a kunai. "I didn't call them. These creeps attacked me first, saying some creep they call their master wanted to meet me," he said angrily, and saw his brother not retorting with any of his usually playful and lazy responses. "I see," Naruto said in such a serious voice, it made Menma glance at his brother curiously. He saw his brother's eyes not shining with their usually mischievous and happy glint, instead were deadly serious and icy as glaciers. It almost made him shiver at the confidence he was holding in front of such strong opponents. Naruto glanced around the battlefield and saw several wooden shards all around the grounds. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together. "You used Makuten?" he asked seriously, and got a simple nod from his brother. Any other day, Naruto would have chewed him out for revealing it to an enemy, but when he saw his brother's condition and his opponent's conditions even after using his abilities, he couldn't blame him. Naruto knew that if his brother hadn't even made a scratch on these masked men even while going all out, they were the real deal and not some wannabes wearing masks and Anbu armors. His mind had started calculating all the possibilities and strategies in his mind. He was on his home turf and knew the grounds like the back of his hand. That was advantage number one. His brother's condition was a disadvantage, but their opponents had an injured member too, and Menma's wound weren't grave, so he could still fight. That was a plus in his mind too. They had only a limited amount of time if Naruto could, and he would alert the Anbu nearby them, as soon as he had the chance. His mind was brought back to the opponents when their lead kunoichi spoke up. "Naruto namikaze," she said monotonously, and Naruto said nothing. His mind was still thinking of the many strategies he could pull off and how to go about fighting them. "What do you want?" he asked to buy himself some time, and saw the four stand silently for a moment before she spoke up. "Our master wishes to meet your little brother. We are to take him there by any means necessary. Please do not interfere, for our master regards you highly, and would not be pleased if you were injured gravely in our fight," she said monotonously, and Naruto stood silently. Her tone, their way of machine-like precision and postures. He had an inkling of an idea of who this master was. And if he was right, then this wasn't going to be pretty. "Tell Danzo, My brother doesn't want to meet him, and Naruto Namikaze sends his regards through his lackeys, he said coldly, and saw the brute behind her stiffen slightly as soon as he mentioned that cripple's name. Menma wanted to know how his brother knew this Danzo, but that was a talk for another time, he reminded himself. Bingo. Naruto thought inwardly, while the kunoichi was now regarding him seriously. The boy wasn't like his brother, and was eyeing them like a hawk eyed its prey. Moreover, there wasn't an ounce of fear in his azure eyes. A calm opponent was a deadly opponent. This was taught to all Rudanbus, and she was now taking him a bit more seriously than his brother. I request you to stand down and let this go peacefully. We have not been ordered to harm your brother, just to escort him peacefully. Her voice rang out for a final ultimatum, which the blonde ignored with a smirk. The plan was now set in his mind. Menma, you take the two on the right, leave the lead kunoichi and brute to me, he whispered to him, and raised his sword in front of him, dropping in his stance. Menma wanted to argue about him taking on their strongest all on his own, but now wasn't the time. He himself was injured and his brother was strong enough to take care of himself. Plus, his mind at strategies on the fly was unparalleled. He was the only one he could trust his back to right now. All right, leave those two to me, was all he could say before Naruto was off in a blur. He slashed and met his blade with the kunoichis, and both jumped up as the huge blade passed under them, courtesy of the brute. Menma jumped forward and launched a kick to the injured Anbu's arm, who blocked and grimaced, jumping back. He threw a kunai at the fourth Anbu and made him jump back as both the brothers divided them up to their liking. The kunoichi leader was glaring daggers at Naruto from underneath her mask. Everything was going perfectly, until he had come into the fight and turned it around completely. She saw what he was doing, divide and conquer. The oldest and most effective strategy to date. But it wouldn't work on them, since it gave her the perfect situation she needed right now. She and her partner would take out the Naruto while his brother held off her other partners, and then go to capture his weakened and exhausted brother like they wanted to. It was the perfect plan in her mind. Naruto's Sharingan blazed to life, unknown to the two of them. He could predict what that kunoichi was thinking, and it was right of her to think that. He wasn't stupid enough to think he could take those two on head-on and win. But a shinobi's way was that of deception. And he had many advantages in his favor right now. The pieces were set, and now it was time to start the game. He watched the kunoichi crouch a little and flick out a volley of shurikens at him. He brought his sword forward, his Sharingan enabling him to predict each and every one of their paths. His blade met each star with deadly precision, always at the last moment, and jumped up when he heard a whiz from behind him. The large blade passed underneath him harmlessly, and his eyes widened as he twisted in mid-air suddenly. His Sharingan arrowed in on the thin chakra-laced wire that was aimed to cleave his neck off right now. The kunoichi was shocked that he had seen her invisible wire attack, and launched a kick to the blonde's chest. Naruto could only bring his blade forward to block in mid-air, and was launched back harshly. He twisted himself, mid-air, with the agility akin of a cat. His feet made contact with the brute's large chest when he let out a smirk. He pumped a burst of chakra to his feet, and the brute was thrown back from the sudden contact. Naruto jumped forward and brought his blade down at the female Anbu, who blocked it and held him at a stalemate. She broke off their encounter with a wild slash, which Naruto backflipped efficiently and stood in front of her with a smirk. The Anbu knew something was up seeing his smirk, and was on her guard. His right hand blurred through 6 single-handed seals, shocking her to the core. Single-handed seals? Janan don't have the required chakra control for that. She thought in shock, and watched him breathe in a deep breath. Fire style. Grand Fireball Jutsu, he exclaimed and launched a humongous fireball at the shocked kunoichi. The brute jumped in front of her and brought his large blade forward as a shield. The jutsu impacted with his blade and created a huge blast, launching the two back from the shock wave it created. Naruto though smirked happily at the outcome. He loved it when a plan came together. That should wake up the neighbors, he thought with a smirk, and wasn't surprised when he saw the two mostly unharmed Anbu in front of him. The brute's blade glowed a little with the heat it had endured, and his arms were burned from the intense heat he had just blocked, rendering them almost inept for battle. The female lead Anbu knew now she had to take the boy seriously. She didn't want to kill him for fear of angering her master, but he was too big of a threat with his extraordinary skills to be left alive or to be taken lightly in this battle for that matter. With Menma swiped his kunai at the Anbu, putting in all his strength, and the Anbu grimaced when he blocked the blow with his injured arm. He jumped back to gain a little distance, when he saw his partner regrouping with him and tried to heal him a little. "Your brother will be killed unless you surrender," the injured Anbu said, and Menma couldn't help but snort. The Anbu, however, ignored his response and continued, "He is fighting the most skilled and feared kunoichi in our ranks, head-on. She specializes in silent assassinations and infiltration tactics. You should surrender, and his life might be spared. He reasoned with the redhead, who now grew a little nervous hearing that. As much as was loath to admit it, maybe Naruto might. His thoughts trailed off when the three of them turned and saw the huge blast track they're clearing. Menma let out a cocky smirk, and pulled out another kunai to go at it again when he saw his brother standing there confidently and relatively unharmed. "You should worry about your own leader, my brother is quite exceptional himself. There is a reason I look up to him after all," he said in determination and launched forward to keep up with the plan. With Naruto saw the brute go aside with a limp, and knew he was out for the count and was only standing there for standby support. He narrowed his eyes at the kunoichi, who was now holding her sword single-handedly and taking out shurikens with the other. "Prepare to die," she said coldly, and launched the 3 shurikens at him. Naruto was about to sidestep, when he narrowed his eyes and his domo spun wildly to slow down his perception drastically. He realized what she was trying to do and stood his ground. He brought his sword up and sidestepped the stars at the last possible second, launching forward towards the kunoichi, who jumped back and took onto a branch of a tree, throwing some more shurikens. Again his Sharingan picked up the slight difference in normal shurikens and these ones, and sidestepped them at the last possible moment and tried to attack her. She met his blade this time, and both engaged in a spar of pure kenjutsu. Naruto jumped back when she tried to overpower him with her experienced style of swords, and narrowed his eyes when he saw her launch even more shurikens at him. This time though, they were simple shurikens, he noted, and twisted his body in midair to dodge them and saw the final 3 he won't be able to dodge. His Sharingan saw them in slow motion, right until the last moment when their holes converged themselves and he threw his sword right in their middle. "This is the power of the Sharingan," he thought, smirking inwardly at how much it was now integrated with each and every one of his battle styles. The sword's blade took the shurikens with it, pinning them to the ground right through their holes, halting them to a spinning stop, and he fell on top of the hilt of his sword, crossing his arms with a smirk. "Is that all you've got?" he asked in taunt, and noticed he was now in the middle of a small clearing of trees. The kunoichi smirked and jumped in front of him. "You are skilled indeed, Naruto-san, but this is the end of the line," she said blankly, and flicked her fingers slightly, making the ninja wires covering him from everywhere like a web of a spider shine into view purposefully. His eyes widened in shock, making the kunoichi smirk slightly behind her mask. She brought up her sword to a shining wire, and applied pressure to it. "You were trapped from the moment I first attacked you," she explained blankly, and cut the wire to activate her trap. She smirked when one by one they all started tripping and closing in on the shocked blonde. A moment later she felt her wrist being pulled, and glanced down to see her own wires tangling her. She couldn't finish, when all the trapping wires trapped her limbs and neck tightly in a trap that she had set for the blonde. She glared at the blonde and let out a loud shriek when the wire around her neck drew blood slowly and stood as still as possible. "Checkmate. And that is how you play the game," Naruto thought happily, when his plans started coming through to their final stages now. "It was a good trap indeed, Kunoichi-san," Naruto commented with an appreciative tone, and jumped down from the hilt of his sword, pulling it out, sheathing it completely in a slick motion. "How?" she grunted in pain, as with each movement the wires tightened themselves and were about to cleave her in many parts of her body. "I saw the wires you attached to the shuriken the moment you threw them. With each throw of your wired shurikens that I dodged, I deflected them ever so slightly with my blade, to my own liking. You were never trapping me, it was always the other way around," he explained, making the kunoichi stun to the core. "Impossible, no one can see my wires, they are too thin for normal humans to see." She grunted in pain, and tried to buy some time for her partner to come. "I have sharp eyes is all I can say. Plus, shuriken jutsu is my specialty. You picked the worst possible opponent for yourself," he said with a smirk, when he saw the wires painfully tighten and he turned around, not wishing to see the bloodbath it would cause in a moment. She was cursing him to hell inwardly, and was wondering where the hell her partner really was. She heard a loud bang and glanced to the side to see an explosion rock near the lake. "Ahhh." She heard her partner scream, and grew confused. Who the hell was he fighting? "Well, my exploding clones and Akira took care of your partner quite nicely. So I guess this is it," he said once more, shocking her completely. He had this all planned from the start. "We were never even close," she thought incredulously, and with a bit of admiration for him. At least she had fallen to a worthy opponent. "Never underestimate an opponent," he said lazily, left the rest hanging, putting his hands in his pockets when the kunoichi spoke up. "Especially when you ambush an opponent on his home grounds. For that is what the Shinobi Rule 39 states," she completed stoically, and Naruto started walking away slowly, his hair shadowing his eyes in sadness and regret at what was about to ensue in a moment. She closed her eyes in defeat and accepted her final moments. Squelch! Naruto grimaced and closed his eyes, not turning around, and jumped on a branch to go and see his brother who was still fighting them. He reminded himself, a shinobi never shows emotions on a battlefield, and jumped away, masking his emotions completely. With Menma, he jumped down in the clearing and saw his brother impale the already injured Anbu with another wooden spear in his other arm. The other Anbu, who was most probably their healing and support ninja, stood by his side. Naruto and the fourth Anbu's senses tingled at the same time. Many heavy chakra signatures were narrowing in on them, and both of them knew who it was. Anbu. Both of them thought in unison. The two Anbu glared at the two brothers, and stood silently for a few moments in a stare-off. Naruto namikaze. The uninjured Anbu spoke up, when he realized his team members who were fighting him couldn't be sensed anymore. Naruto rose an eyebrow when he saw the drone speaking. "We will keep an eye on you from the shadows. You are hiding much more than meets the eye," he said emotionlessly, and disappeared along with his partner in a smokeless sunshine. A moment later, they were surrounded by several teams of Anbus from all sides. The one bearing a bear mask stood forward. "What happened over here?" he asked in a commanding voice, and Menma grunted and rubbed his swollen arm. He glanced to the side to see Naruto have some slashes all over his body, most probably that came in between his own skirmishes. "We were ambushed. 4 masked men came to capture me," the redhead explained, getting a nod from Bear. "Can you tell us something more about them?" he asked, and Menma shrugged, too tired and injured to really care right now. Naruto too had the same thoughts and just wanted to sleep right now, but this was important information he had to provide. "Well, they were root Anbu and were sent by Danzo himself," he said lazily, making them all stiffen and stare at the blonde incredulously. "That complicated things," Bear thought, and walked up to Naruto. "Naruto namikaze, you are coming with us," he said, and Naruto and Menma were about to protest, when he clasped Naruto's shoulder harshly. "Boar, take all the evidences from the battlefield and report them to Hokage-sama. I shall take Namikaze-san in for further questioning," he said in an order, and disappeared along with the blonde. Menma rushed to the spot his brother was a moment earlier. He turned his eyes around to the others who were now jumping out and taking evidences from the clearings. "Where the did you take my brother?" he screamed harshly to Boar, who said nothing and went about his work. Though they all stopped when they heard a shout from behind them. "Menma," was all he heard, when he turned around and was pulled into a bone-crushing hug. He flailed his arms around wildly, gasping for air while Kushina was holding him in a death grip. She broke the hug, making the boy sigh in relief, when she cupped his cheeks and started kissing him all over it. He tried to prof his hysterical mother off, but to no avail. "What happened here?" she asked him with teary eyes, seeing his condition and how their grounds looked like they were a battlefield. "Kasan, 4 Anbu came to capture me and take me with them. I almost lost to them when Naruto," was all he could say when he heard Kushina gasp, and her eyes roamed all around. "Where is he?" she asked him with a bitten lip and nervousness. He turned his furious eyes to Boar, who was now sweating bullets behind his mask. Kushina saw his gaze and narrowed her eyes on the Anbu, increasing his nervousness tenfold. "These bastards took him with them. Some Anbu with a bear mask said they needed to question him. We tried to stop them, but..." He couldn't finish because Kushina had struck out a chakra chain and pulled the Anbu to her, face to face. She was too angry right now to scold the boy for his bad language. "Where the hell is my baby?" she asked in a deadly quiet voice, making him gulp nervously. He would currently be in Anbu HQ for questioning. He trailed off, when he saw her hair flail around in 9 tails. Her murderous violet orbs glared at him as if she was the Shinigami herself. "On what grounds? You had better have a good reason for taking in the heir to a clan and for questioning, without even consulting his clan head or guardians first." She spoke coldly, making him gulp again. "Yusuke Kushina-sama," he said something about root. He stuttered in fright, making Kushina's eyes narrow in on him dangerously. "Danzo, why am I not surprised? So that is the bastard who has attacked my boys," she thought, and glared at the man. Another Anbu jumped down by their side and spoke up nervously, seeing the situation. "Boar, there are 2 mangled corpses in the fields. Most probably root, since their bodies have activated their curse seals," he said dutifully, making Kushina's eyes widen in horror. The second Anbu yelped and was yanked in a chakra chain himself, while her worried eyes turned to Menma, who was looking at the ground guiltily. "Naruto did it," he whispered sadly, making her clench her eyes in agony. Her boy had made his first kill, and instead of having her there to talk to her, he was being questioned in Anbu HQ. Her eyes turned to the 2 shivering Anbu and glared at them. "Let's go and meet the Hokage," she said coldly, and turned to Menma, who smiled a little and nodded, already knowing what she was about to say. He went inside and she disappeared in a swirl of water along with the 2 Anbus. Anbu HQ holding cells. The Anbu headquarters, One of the most secure and hidden holding facilities. Accessible only to the tier of the village truly held up to their reputations and names. Armed with the security of the village's elite, the Anbu Black Ops themselves, it was the go-to place for some of the most high-class criminals that the Leaf had in its captivity. However, the presence of a 14-year-old Janan in the holding facility wasn't an everyday occurrence in here. "Come on now, get in, boy." A Nanbu wearing the bear mask over his face pushed the blonde in harshly and closed the bars behind him with a slam. "Bastard." Naruto couldn't help but mutter. The Anbu though heard it loud and clear and clenched his fists in anger. "What did you say?" he hissed, and Naruto turned to him, annoyance and irritation written clear across his face. He was tired, bruised, beaten and exhausted. That wasn't to say that he had just made his first kill, so it wasn't a surprise that one of the most calm and lazy personalities in the village was a bit snappy at the moment. "You heard me, big guy, you want to make something of it?" Naruto taunted him in a proud voice and confident voice. He would usually just rather ignore all these snide remarks, but after going through what he had just now, he wasn't in the mood to play goody-goody with beer right now. The Anbu captain in question bristled in unrestrained fury. Even the several Anbu patrolling the hallways were snickering at his expense. It wasn't every day that an Anbu captain was talked to this way by a newly minted Janan. "Why?" he growled, clenching the bars, and Naruto stood his ground with an icy glare. All the present Anbu were surprised at how the boy seemed to be holding his own and not in the least bit afraid of disrespecting the blonde. "Thank Kami that you're behind those bars, just bearing your father's name doesn't make the hotshot you tend to be," he retorted back furiously, and Naruto's eyes turned murderous. He took steps towards the bar and stood face to face with the bear-shaped Anbu mask, his Sharingan blazing to life unknown to all but him as soon as a taunt to his father was made. All the guards were surprised when they felt killing intent that matched the one bear was leaking coming off from the blonde. "Why don't you open these bars then? I'll show you how big of a hotshot I really am." "What do you say, big guy?" he snarled back, and the whole hallway felt the thick tension rising between the two each passing moment. Bear couldn't believe how a rookie Janan was even standing, let alone talking back to him and making a fool out of him while he was leaking his own killing intent. "Alright, that's enough. Break IT off." A voice boomed from the side, making the two turn their glances to the source of said voice. Naruto saw a large man wearing a leather trench coat and several scars adorned over his face. His head was covered with a large bandana, while Naruto's Sharingan picked up on his movement muscles and his chakra reserves that were suppressed and controlled. He was an elite Jounin for sure, no doubt about it, he surmised, and looked back to see Bear turning back and looking onto the new man face to face. "What have you brought him here for, Bear?" the large man asked, and Bear nodded. His anger lay forgotten and his duty senses kicked in. "Sir, this boy has apparently fought some rogue Anbus and claims that they belonged to the disbanded Root organization," he said dutifully, making the superior man's eyes widen momentarily. Root was a well-kept secret even when it was still being function, so a newly minted Janan proclaiming to have knowledge of such village secrets was a surprise in itself. But he couldn't decipher the complete situation based on half-assed information. His black eyes turned to the blonde boy who was looking at him with narrowed and calculative eyes that a child his age shouldn't possess. He hadn't felt such eyes other than when his superiors scrutinized him for something. And that really was a rare occurrence, mind you. "Bring him into the interrogation room and call my apprentice too. We'll talk there," he commanded, and Bear nodded, smirking behind his mask when he turned to the blonde who was glaring daggers at the large man's back. Bear opened the cell and pulled the blonde harshly, who was struggled to walk through his violent pushes. Bear couldn't care less, as this was the chance of a lifetime to get some fun with the boy. Naruto walked through the well-lit hallways slowly with slight stumbles from those pushes every now and then. All around the building were simple hallways having white walls and simple prison cells along with several sealed rooms. His Sharingan was still activated, unknown to everyone, while he was etching each and every little detail about the secured wing, burning it all in with his photographic memory granted to him by his eyes. That was one thing Tobirama had drilled into his head over the years: no matter the situation you're in, no matter the place you're in, always scour whatever information you could. For it could be crucial at some point in the future when you least expect it to be. Bear stopped in front of a steel door and opened it. Naruto stumbled and fell down when Bear gave him a violent push in, along with tripping his feet to go along with it completely. Naruto glared at the Anbu that he hated with all his being at that moment and looked around the dank room. It was a dark room, a single bulb hanging from the room, the lone source of light in there at the moment. All the walls seemed to be made out of pure concrete, and there were two wooden chairs along with a simple table in the middle. The only objects in the dank room. It would have been quite intimidating for Naruto, had he not been expecting this same thing beforehand. After all, this was the classic interrogation room in almost all stories and movies he had seen over the years. How original. He muttered to himself dryly and stood up, his hands still in metal handcuffs. He made his way to a chair and plopped down over it with a tired sigh. "So this is what I get for fighting rogue Onbu who are after my life and getting rid of them. Well, they sure are scoring points on the guest treatment department," he thought bitterly with a scowl on his usually happy face. His mood was worsening over here by the minute, and to top it off these bastards were doing the very thing he despised with his very being. Ordering him around, pushing him into a corner as if he was their possession. That was one thing he despised with his very being. He was a free boy who loved freedom in everything he did, and this wasn't on one of his favorite lists. His thoughts were broken off when the door opened, making him squint his eyes from the new bright light before it was closed and two people walked in. The large man from before took a seat in front of him, slamming a tape recorder on the table and a clipboard kept at his friend's hands. Behind him was a woman, no doubt the apprentice he was talking about from earlier. "Well, let's get this thing started," he said in a professional manner, making Naruto's eyes turn to him though he remained silent and calm. Flushing his anger out of his system, he remembered all the things Tobirama had taught him about being in an enemy territory and being interrogated for information you didn't want to give. And right now he wasn't going to give these creeps any information whatsoever until he had talked it out with the old man. Now he thanked his old man inwardly for the lesson he had once seen as dank and boring but had been forced to learn by his master and by proxy, which was now going to come in handy. He had his pride on the line here with how they were treating him, and he would be damned if he let it go on any further. "Name?" he asked professionally to start in a casual manner since he wasn't an enemy shinobi or anything, and Naruto stared at him blankly, making him feel quite stupid from that stare. Even the woman was staring at him blankly and he coughed in his hand, feeling a bit embarrassed now. "Look, it is protocol so we have to follow it," he said stoically, trying to keep his dignity intact, and Naruto still remained silent. The large man couldn't help but praise the boy inwardly at the completely blank and emotionless expression he was holding at the moment. Even he could not read what was going on through his head currently. "It is usually polite to give your own introduction first before asking for someone else's. At least that was what I was taught growing up. Not so sure about you though," Naruto remarked dryly, making the man's eye narrow in on him. He was definitely Kakashi's student all right. Both could annoy him with these dry and aloof remarks any time. He glared to the side when he heard the slight giggles coming from his apprentice with a look that said, "You were not helping me any." He turned back to the boy to see his firm eyes that didn't seem to budge from his intense stare. "The boy's good," he thought, and nodded after a moment. But he still needed to get this over with as soon as possible. "Very well, I'm Ibiki Morino, the head of Onbu's torture and interrogation unit. My friend here is Onko Mitarashi, my second-in-command and personal apprentice," he said, pointing to his right, and Naruto glanced at the exotically dressed Kunoichi for a moment only to shiver inwardly at her sadistic smile and got a wave in return. "Yo!" she chirped happily, making Naruto sweat drop at the happy girl. Was she really an interrogator? But he knew better than to make assumptions on looks and first impressions alone. "Naruto Namikaze," he said simply, and the two looked at him curiously but became embarrassed when they realized he was done and looked at each other before turning back to him. "All right, Naruto-san. So to get started, what was the level of the opponents you faced tonight?" he asked, and couldn't help but think what the boy was thinking right now. His face wasn't giving anything away, and that was saying something, since he had cracked a lot of hard nuts with his intense stares alone that had seemingly no effect on this rookie Jinan. All three were silent for a few moments, with the adults thinking he was taking time to mull over their question. However, the answer they got wasn't what they were expecting. "I'm not obliged to answer your question," he replied simply, making the two adults blink. They stared at him incredulously and blinked again. "Excuse me? I think I didn't quite get you," Ibiki said in disbelief, making Naruto nod slowly. "Then I repeat, I'm not obliged to answer your question," he said simply yet again, and this time Ibiki's eyes narrowed in on him. There weren't many people who would like to play hardball with him. "And why is that?" he asked calmly, but was a little perturbed by the blonde on his inside. He couldn't, for the life of him, predict what he was going to say next. Do next. He cursed that scarecrow of a sensei of his. He was rubbing off on him in all the wrong ways. A few more months and the boy would be wearing a face mask while reading his precious gold all the time. But he looked up when the blonde in the questioning seat spoke up. "Because this interrogation is based on grounds so loose, I'm sure Lord Hokage will have a field day with you all. And if he doesn't, my mother and old man surely will," he answered him calmly, without a hint of emotion in his voice. Ibiki leaned forward with a raised eyebrow, putting his chin over his hands. Now this was one answer no one had given him before. And this was a pretty new way of landing a threat over him of all people. "Oh, and how is that, if I may ask?" he asked dryly, disbelief and amusement etched completely in his voice. Naruto's eyes turned icy, surprising the two at his intense stare he was giving them right now. As Konohagakure no Sato's charter, laid down by the mutual agreement of the Shodai Hokage and the daimyo himself, says in Article 21b Section C subsection A. The rules for interrogating a prisoner who isn't accused of anything that has been done against the village or might harm the village in any ways can only be interrogated within the presence of the Hokage himself, or through his direct orders that are first shown to the appointed victim unless arrested in by the village, and only if, when he is accused on grounds of treason with viable evidences in their midst. And I for one, am on the first stance that I haven't done anything tonight that can be considered grounds for treason. As such, this whole interrogation is seemingly useless and completely illegal," he answered calmly. Complete and utter silence reigned in on the floors of the interrogation cell. Even a pin drop could have been heard in the room, had there been a pin actually dropped. Ibiki was staring at him wide-eyed. He for one didn't know how to respond or say anything to the blonde, who had just stated a small paragraph from the 1,000-page charter of the village's founding laws as if it was a recital poem. Anko though was stupefied at his words. Never before had she heard a boy, his age she might add, recite a village law word to word, and she was quite sure she didn't even remember what the village charter actually was. He broke out of his stupor when Anko let out a wolfish whistle towards the blonde and giggled happily. Now that was something to make my man Ibiki go silent in an interrogation. "I like the little gaki," she said in giggles, and got a death glare from her accomplice for her words. That once more weren't helping the tense situation any. He turned back to the blonde and smirked inwardly. The blonde really was something else, for never before had someone pulled that card on him, and his words had grounds of heavy consideration too. But not this time. He held his hand out to Anko, who stared at him blankly. He broke off from his stare-off with the blonde and looked at Anko's innocent expression, making his eyes twitch in annoyance. "Anko," he growled out, not in the mood for her antics right now. "Ibiki," she continued innocently, not getting his point, and a tick mark appeared on his forehead. Naruto watched the two in complete amusement from the sidelines. Now this he had to see for himself. "The papers for permission of interrogation signed by Lord Hokage himself, if you would please," he continued patiently, though his patience were running quite thin right about now. "What papers?" Anko asked in pure innocence, making him look at her incredulously. She had done this with him 1,000 times with him, right? "The papers that Bear must have handed to you for the holding an interrogation on one Naruto Namikaze," he answered, barely holding his thin patience online, and all he got was an innocent stare with a pout from his apprentice. "That idiot didn't give me nothing, Ibiki. I thought he handed those to you. After all, you called for me here, remember?" she asked him with a pointed finger, making him look at her incredulously. He hadn't gotten any orders to, for that matter, none officially signed by the Hokage. "There aren't any official orders, because no one got them or was issued any." The ever-calm voice of Naruto rang in the room, making Ibiki look at him incredulously. Though Naruto continued on undeterred of the man's stare. "Bear, as you called him, picked me up straight from my house as soon as I mentioned the word root to that idiot. As such, there are no official orders, and my words from earlier stand true," he finished calmly, and Ibiki rubbed his forehead and pinched his nose with a sigh. This was utterly humiliating and embarrassing for the entire Black Ops unit. No doubt Kushina would raise hell over kidnapping a clan heir from his home grounds, done by them no less, in the council, and she had clear grounds to do so. And the Hokage would be out for next to handle the perpetrators in question. He would be in that list too, since his trust in his accomplices had led to this situation getting this far out of control. "Why the hell would that idiot Bear Anbu?" he growled to himself, but was surprised when an answer came from in front of him. "Probably to take out his grudge on me. I'm not the most liked around person in the village, you know," he said pointedly, making Ibiki slap his forehead in exasperation. That damned idiot was so damn unprofessional. He was personally going to see through his suspension now. Click. Naruto looked up surprised and rubbed his now freed wrists to turn his eyes to the softly smiling Kunoichi, who ruffled his hair playfully. "Not everyone thinks of you that way, Gaki. Count me in one of those, K?" she asked him, with her usual grin, and Naruto couldn't help but smile at the eccentric Kunoichi. "Arigato Madarashi-san," he said politely, making her grin sadistically before she was wrapped up all over him and rubbing his cheek with hers. Naruto turned beet red at the completely pressed Kunoichi now resting on his lap and so close to him, barely holding on to his pride and dignity right now. "Ah, what's with the formalities, Gaki? Don't you like your sexy friend Aiko-chan, eh?" she purred sexily in his ear, and Naruto's sweat dropped at her bipolar nature, feeling quite uncomfortable now with the two large mounds pressed seductively on his chest. Ibiki decided to stop her before she went out of control, and he wouldn't be able to save the boy from her when she got going. "Anko, stop your antics now, he is a kid. Do you want to be considered a pedophile?" "I for one don't think so," asked Ibiki dryly, making her pout childishly before she licked Naruto's cheek sexily, involuntarily making the blonde shiver and feel completely helpless at her erotic actions. Is this how his Heim felt when he teased her? He couldn't help but think that, but crushed his thoughts instantly when he saw her licking her lips with a bloodthirsty gaze that made his insides twist, and his mask was now on the verge of falling apart completely. No, this woman's plain old crazy. He thought instantly, and sighed in relief when she was off of him and grinning at his crimson cheeks like crazy, feeling quite proud of her skills and bodily features right now. Naruto couldn't help but look away from that utterly revealing mesh suit that she was displaying all the more heavily now by pressing her arms together near her chest to make her cleavage a lot more revealing, not like it wasn't already. What the hell was wrong with that lady? So now can I leave? He asked Ibiki, the exhaustion of his day finally catching up to him, and to get away from a grinning Anko. The man though, as much as he wanted to say yes and be done with this mess, shook his head. I'm sorry kid, but you have been signed into the holding cells officially. So I will have to go to Hokage-sama and get your release papers signed. You can stay in the holding cells, I'll get you one of the nicer ones and some food too. So don't worry, just let me clear out this mess, he said, and Naruto nodded with a tired sigh. This was really getting bothersome and he just wanted to go home now. Anko, take him to his cell and get him settled in, I'll go straight to the tower and clear this up myself. She motioned a finger to him in a seductive manner and walked with a sway of her hips. Naruto looked at Ibiki blankly, giving him his sensei's patented look, who sighed tiredly. Don't worry, you'll be fine, she is just playful is all. He reasoned, but saw the boy was not really convinced when the girl in question was licking her lips and calling him to hurry it up, a bit too playful, but harmless nonetheless. He continued on, and this time Naruto nodded hesitantly. Satisfied a bit by the large man's answer, he walked with Anko, who just made small talk with him, putting in her own suggestive remarks that made him flustered at her blunt words each time and got laughs from said kunoichi. Finally, they stopped in front of a cell which the Violette opened up for him, putting her hands on her hips. Alright Gaki, this is your abode for now, enjoy. She chirped happily, making Naruto relieved that at least the bed looked like it had a mattress and wasn't all steel. He looked back to see the grinning kunoichi, who was still standing there, and shivered inwardly when she licked her lips seductively. Or I can stay with you and show you a nice time, you know, pop your cherry and all? She said sexily, making all the blood in his body rush up to his cheeks. What? What the hell is wrong with you? He shouted, completely flushed like his adorable kitten when she was teased by him, and his eye twitched when she just laughed wholeheartedly at his reactions. He was just too easy for her. He slammed the bars shut, which was quite ironical that someone wanted to get locked up so hurriedly. But he wasn't willing to take any chances with that kunoichi. She wasn't normal, that's for sure. Alright Gaki, I'll send some food later on, so sleep a little, alright? It's quite late already. She waved him, walking down the hallways. He winced when he heard a crack and a man's scream, followed by Anko's laugh, who cackled no touching out loud. He had a fairly good idea of what must have happened and fell down on bed face first. Finally, so how was your first interrogation? A new voice trailed off in the middle of the dead silent room when the blonde yelped and fell down on the floor face first, completely shocked at the new presence, no doubt. Tobirama watched the twitching blonde on the floor with a sweat drop. Wasn't he supposed to be a censor and all? Naruto rubbed his aching nose and glared at the stoic Senju sitting on the chair as if he was in a park, sitting on a bench. How long have you known I? Wait, scratch that. How long have you been observing me? He asked him in an accusing tone, knowing the man's thinking process after observing them so closely for years. Tobirama just shrugged carelessly, and Naruto knew he won't be getting anything else out of the man now. He could be quite annoying like that when he wanted to. So I heard you had an interesting night. Tobirama spoke, changing the subject to what he wanted to hear right now. Instantly he saw the slight changes in the boy's features, who now looked a bit downtrodden. I killed 2 of them, he said simply, already knowing the man in front of him knew everything else. Tobirama said nothing and leaned back in his chair, his eyes gazing at the ceiling with a slight furrowing of eyebrows. That isn't like you. He started, seeing the boy's even more solemn look he knew something else was up. You would avoid pointless slaughter, what really happened? He asked in his calm voice, containing a hint of concern for the pupil he saw as his son in all ways but blood. They attacked Menma, so I tried to stop them as best as I possibly could have, and almost succeeded, he whispered shamefully. Tobirama hung on to his every word. First kills were what made or break most shinobi careers as they came to realize what this life was really about. I trapped the kunoichi leader. The girl tried to weave a shuriken jutsu trap on me and I countered it subtly to trap her instead. I restrained that huge bulky guy with my exploding clones, and Akira too had gotten a lot of hits on him. He continued on his tale, making Tobirama nod. He wouldn't say it right now seeing the situation, but he was proud of the way the boy had gone about executing the fight. Show as little as you can and maximize the outcome with the least possible moves. Efficiency, precision and stealth. The true marks of a shinobi. That was what he had taught him most of all, and he was proud that his student had embraced it to heart. What happened then? he asked calmly, and for the first time Naruto raised his head to uncover his shadowed azure eyes, that were shimmering with tears on the verge of dropping now. The kunoichi in the trap was trapped in such a way that each movement caused the trap to tighten itself on her to the point of being fatal, and I warned the big Anbu that if he didn't surrender then I would blow him. He trailed off in sobs, and Tobirama now understood everything. The boy never did have a heart akin to a killer, but now he knew what had happened truly, which was what had him in a loop when he had heard of what had transpired tonight after his disciple had left his residence. The boy had engaged, trapped and given his enemies a fair chance to surrender and become captives to live another day, but they were root. Their primary objective was mission success or obliterating all traces that could lead back to their sources, even their lives. I didn't kill them, old man. I gave them a chance, but the kunoichi, she just didn't. He sobbed hysterically, and Tobirama pulled his face in his chest and let the boy cry it all out. It was for the better if he let it all out and didn't bottle it up. And now that he knew what had truly happened, he was even prouder of his student. The boy really did live up to each expectation he held for him and surpassed them each time. This time was no different, but this time it had led to a change in him. The boy had finally grown up and become a true shinobi, now taking his first steps in the crimson paths of this dark life. I'm not a monster, old man. I'm no demon. I didn't want to kill them. I swear, he mumbled in between his wails, and Tobirama's heart clenched before he steeled his features and cupped the boy's cheeks to make him look at his eyes forcefully. The village's snide and subtle remarks had gotten to him apparently, over the years, not that it wasn't expected due to their foolishness, but he had to clear his mind up right now. I know you're no demon, Naruto, for a demon never gives a chance to its prey and kills them without remorse. The fact you gave them one even if they wish to die rather than take it and still grieve for what happened makes you more human than most in the world, son, he said calmly. Naruto calmed down to soft sniffles, hearing the years of experience and wise words laced in his voice. The concern in his eyes and the confidence that he was telling the truth, plus the fact that he called him the one thing that he had longed for hearing, made him break down again and hug his father figure for dear life. Tobirama rubbed his back for a few more moments before the arms hugging his chest went soft and he felt the boy no standing up only by his support on him. He smiled and scooped the boy up in his arms, who had finally been drained enough to be completely knocked out now and disappeared in the death of the night. Omake. Through the silent hallways of the Anbu HQ holding cells, a lone figure strolled by nonchalantly as if it were an amusement park for him. The man's face covered with his usual face mask and his lone eye showing nothing but a lazy aloof side to the man's casual appearance. It had been some time since Kakashi had retired from the Anbu, but he was still one of its most respected and looked up to retired members. So he had a bit of say and leverage to go in as he wanted to within their confines. Some previous Anbu that were once under him even approached him for some advice rather occasionally, seeing the man's impeccable record and fame among the Black Ops. So when he had apparently heard, that is, from outside the Hokage office's window. Not that he was quite brave, courageous and completely stupid enough to actually venture in when the Uzumaki clan head was in one of her moods. He had come to know that all that sudden deployment and convergence of Anbu patrols was due to his cute little Jinan's actions tonight. And Kushina's reason for throwing her tantrum was because he had apparently been arrested by some stupid and no doubt new member of the Black Ops. He tucked his hands in his pockets, searching for the living quarter where they had put his charge in and to take him out of there. What kind of a sensei would he be if he let his cute Jinan be in here any while longer when he had such a caring and loving sensei for him? That was beside the point that he was still a couple of hours late. But that was a moot point and could be neglected. After all, he would be well taken care of in the most secure prison in the village. Right? Kakashi, what the hell are you doing here? Asked an annoyed voice of one of Ikki Morino, who wasn't in one of his best moods, knowing what he would have to explain to the Hokage and then subsequently the council before they were scrutinized for their actions by those coots. Ikki, just the man I wanted to see, he said in a nostalgic voice, making the man's frown deepen. He didn't like Kakashi one bit. He was quite possibly his least favorite person in the village. What do you want? He asked gruffly, making the Jounin give him his patented eye smile, much to the big man's annoyance. You see, my Jounin is under some confusion. Been arrested by some newbie. So I thought I should cash in a favor from all of the other ones you only remember? He asked in his aloof voice, and Iviki's frown turned into a full-blown scowl. Ikki Morino, head of the Anbu Torture and Interrogation Unit, probably the scariest person alive for any captive shinobi and a master deceptive, was an excellent poker player too. He had beaten everyone in the village with his stone face, and his critical eye for discerning what makes a person tick had made him a magician with the cards. He had won against all other than Kakashi, that is. It was really hard to discern what a man was thinking when 3/4 of his face was hidden in cloth and his lone visible eye was always held half-lidded, containing all the mirth and aloofness in the world. In one word, he was Iviki's kryptonite. He hated it when the Jounin beat him at the table and gave him that annoying crinkle of an eye he called a smile. and would rather leave than cashing up on his win, saying he would keep it as a favor for later. Apparently, today he wanted to cash in on one. "Let me guess, you want to get Namikaze out, don't you?" he asked dryly, making the Jounin eye smile. Iviki's eye twitched. He had half a mind to rip his lone eye out to keep him from smiling again. He was probably the most hated person on his list, with now his student a close second. Like master, like pupil, he mused. "All right, here are the keys. You can take him. I suppose I know Sandaime won't be too keen on keeping him in anyway. We'll just report him. He left after his orders," he said tiredly, not one to put up with twisting the rules, but he couldn't say no to Kakashi. He owed the man a lot, bets or not. Kakashi nodded and went down to the cell Ibiki had told him to. How his Shinon would look up to him, his savior. He couldn't believe it. Maybe he might even squeeze out a favor and get a limited edition book from his godfather. Now that would be something, and the boy would most probably hug him to death for coming to his rescue. And then he would tell his teammates, who too would look up to him and worship the very ground he walked on. Oh, what a great teacher he was. Clink. "Yo, Naruto. See, your sensei came too." Whiz. A breeze blew in the completely sealed up room, which was quite comical if one might see, and the Jounin sweat dropped at seeing the cell devoid of any life. He checked the cell number and register again, but saw he was in the right one, which meant someone had come in and done the rescuing a little earlier. A few moments later, a scarecrow Jounin was crouched in the corner of the cell, drawing circles on the floor with a tear leaking down his lone eye. All his plans were ruined, and someone had cashed in on his idea an hour earlier. If only he hadn't embraced his friend's philosophies in life so to heart, then. "Obito, this time I don't like you," he whispered, sulking in his own tardiness when the cell accidentally closed with that imaginary breeze. The Jounin, unaware that he was locked in until someone came and got him out, just sulked in a corner at his failure to become a star in his Jounin team's eyes. What a day it truly was. That's the end, guys. If you enjoyed, then make sure to leave a comment. This is Chaos Shinobi signing off.